Our grandson is on his way home, so let's indulge in steak once more, right this moment. Quick, let's get the catering sorted at my in-laws. We treat ourselves to steak through catering once a month, a delightful tradition. Yet again, I find myself left out. How many times has this happened now? Every time we order, my mother-in-law conveniently overlooks my steak, leaving me empty-handed. She's quite assertive, and I just can't seem to stand up to her. I suppose I'll have to endure it once more. Just when I was about to resign myself to the situation, Grandma's actions feel particularly unkind. My name is Raina, a 38-year-old housewife without any remarkable talents. I resorted to a matchmaking service to find my current husband, Craig. Marriage seemed elusive until I met Craig, who shared my passion for movies. Our bond blossomed over movie dates, leading to a smooth courtship and marriage. Initially kind, Craig's demeanor changed after our son was born. Two significant changes altered the course of our lives. Firstly, our son's intelligence soared, excelling academically far beyond his age. Despite his brilliance, he faced bullying at school and eventually stopped attending. Encouraged by a teacher, he now studies at Cambridge University in England. The second change was moving into my in-laws' house due to my husband's work relocation. Living with my in-laws was a stark transition. My father-in-law's illness confined him to the hospital, leaving only my mother-in-law at home. As a former working woman turned housewife, adapting to this new life proved challenging, setting the stage for further difficulties ahead. Feeling under the weather, I was greeted on my first day in my husband's family home with a directive. "Work hard for me, young one," my mother-in-law said. Yet she appeared far from unwell, exuding more energy than me. "How old are you, mother-in-law?" I inquired tentatively. 64 this year, my husband replied, his tone tinged with annoyance. Despite her apparent vigor, in this household, her word was law. My husband's warning left me feeling isolated. It was evident my mother-in-law harbored hostility towards me, but I hadn't anticipated my husband's detachment. Even though our marriage had cooled, his abandonment stung. "Let's get to work," my mother-in-law commanded, thrusting an old mop and bucket into my hands. Surveying the dusty corners, I yearned to wield the vacuum cleaner. However, she insisted I tackle it all with the mop, rejecting modern conveniences. "Can I use the vacuum cleaner?" I ventured, hoping to address the dust efficiently. "No, stick to the mop," she curtly replied. Reluctantly, I agreed, concealing my frustration. As I began cleaning, I proposed we work together, but my mother-in-law intervened, asserting that my husband and she would rest while I toiled alone. Daunted by the size of the house, I realized the task was insurmountable solo. To compound matters, my mother-in-law added the chore of dishwashing to my already overflowing plate. Overwhelmed, I struggled to keep pace with her demands, feeling the weight of my new responsibilities bearing down on me. "I can't handle it all. The house is too big," I confessed, overwhelmed. In response, my mother-in-law offered a solution. "I'll permit you to use the vacuum for $10 every 10 minutes. How's that?" But the cost was steep, far beyond my means. Her disdain for my financial situation stung, branding me a poor daughter-in-law. My husband, silent and unhelpful, stood by as I endured her belittlement. He even criticized my mopping technique, insisting it was improper to converse while cleaning. The solitude we shared before moving in with his parents had transformed into a form of psychological abuse. Amidst the tension, my mother-in-law announced plans for steak, summoning catering. Though exhausted from cleaning and dishwashing, the promise of steak fueled my determination. I had invested extra effort into preparing for this moment, eagerly anticipating the reward. As the catered steak arrived, my excitement peaked, but my joy was short-lived. Despite my efforts, my mother-in-law declared there was no steak for me, leaving me crestfallen. The disappointment cut deep, shattering my anticipation and leaving me deflated. "I've cleaned the floors and done the dishes," I informed my mother-in-law, only to be met with dismissal. "That's only natural," she replied. "Consider it a token of appreciation for letting you stay. Think of it as paying a fee through your actions. Did you think you could live here for free?" Her words pierced through me, amplifying the sense of hellishness that had engulfed my life since moving into my in-laws' house due to my husband's work. Financially constrained and unable to afford living independently, I relied on a meager monthly allowance of $200 since getting married. After covering essentials and previous expenses, there was nothing left to save. The naive expectation of security as a housewife shattered in the face of harsh reality. As for dinner, my mother-in-law's unpreparedness spoke volumes. While they indulged in high-quality steaks, I was offered noodles. The stark contrast highlighted my subordinate status in the family. Even the act of washing the knife and fork after their meal was the closest I came to the steak. From the very first day, mistreatment became routine, leaving me mentally and physically drained. Amidst this despair, a rare call from our son studying abroad brought a glimmer of warmth. Praising my embroidery, he reminded me of my skills. His words, a balm to my soul, stirred emotions long buried under layers of neglect. But even in my moment of happiness, his keen perception sensed my trembling voice. A testament to his high IQ and psychological acumen, his concern mirrored the distance between us. Yet in his distant words I found solace, a reminder that amidst the darkness there remained a flicker of light. I couldn't believe how much my son had changed. He seemed to have an uncanny ability to see through my facade, sensing something was amiss with Dad. After a moment of silence, I summoned the courage to confide in him about the situation at my in-laws' house. Despite feeling ashamed for airing my troubles, having someone to confide in felt like a lifeline. "It's tough every day," I admitted, but he reassured me. "I'll come over once it's our vacation, and I've saved up some money from my part-time job," he promised, refusing to take no for an answer. With my son's imminent return home, time seemed to fly during our overdue phone call. An hour passed, leaving me feeling rejuvenated by his unwavering support. However, as soon as the call ended, my mother-in-law approached with a sharp glare. "That's quite a luxurious long phone call," she remarked, draining the energy I had gained from our conversation. Despite my apologies, she swiftly shifted the conversation to the upcoming block party, assigning me the task of shopping and making a reservation for steak catering. The day of the block party arrived, and guests began to gather. My mother-in-law, dubbed the president by everyone, was the center of attention. Amidst the festivities, she wasted no time in ordering me around, using me as her servant regardless of who was present. Some guests spoke up in my defense, urging my mother-in-law to treat me more kindly, but her threats silenced them, reminding them of their place in the community. Their initial support quickly waned under her influence, leaving me feeling even more isolated. It became evident that my mother-in-law's control extended beyond our house, permeating the entire area. Against her power, I felt powerless, a mere housewife unable to challenge her authority. The ordered steak arrived, and my mother-in-law joyfully arranged it on the table. Her choice was surprisingly lavish, accompanied by an array of high-end side dishes like caviar and truffles. Yet even amidst the opulence, she couldn't resist lecturing me. "Do you really think you deserve such fine steak as a wife? You're 100 years too early for that," she chided, her words a public humiliation. The sympathetic glances from those around us only deepened my sense of isolation. No one dared oppose her, not even my husband, who quietly savored his steak. Hope flickered within me, hoping for even a small portion of the steak. But my mother-in-law's words dashed those hopes, offering beef noodles instead. Upgraded from the ordinary, but still far from what I craved. Frustration simmered beneath the surface until it boiled over, and I couldn't contain it any longer. "Mother-in-law, this is too much," I exclaimed, my voice breaking the tension. "I've prepared everything for today's block party, and yet you treat me like this." Her response was swift and harsh, shutting down any semblance of rebellion. "Is this true, Reina? Couldn't you show a little kindness?" My husband interjected, hoping to defuse the situation, but his words fell on deaf ears as my mother-in-law's resolve remained unshaken. Silenced by her intimidation, no one dared challenge her authority. In that moment, it became painfully clear that in this household her word was law, leaving me to navigate a world where my desires and efforts were constantly undermined. "Remember, you must obey Mother in this house," my husband's sudden, authoritative voice echoed through the room, causing my body to instinctively flinch. The once lively atmosphere fell silent, and even those who had supported me began to echo his sentiment, filling the room with resounding agreement. Frustrated and overwhelmed, I fled from the scene, seeking solace in the sanctuary of my bedroom. Time seemed to blur as I locked myself away, the weight of the situation bearing down on me until exhaustion claimed me. When I awoke, the block party had dispersed and the night had fallen. Glancing at my phone, I found an email from my son, announcing his imminent arrival. Despite the exhaustion, I drifted back to sleep, awaiting his return. The next morning, I found my mother-in-law in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Without preamble, she remarked on my behavior from the previous day, her words cutting through the air. Informed of my son's impending visit, she immediately pivoted to plans for steak, eager for his return. As evening descended, my son finally arrived home, greeted by a table laden with lavish steaks. Despite his usual enjoyment of the meal, he couldn't help but notice my absence from the feast. Concerned, he questioned my mother-in-law, only to be met with a dismissive response. "It's fine, Reina is always like this," she waved off his concern, redirecting his attention to the meal before him. Despite her apparent happiness at being reunited with her grandson, my son's response was unexpected, his words laden with a depth of emotion I hadn't anticipated. "I don't want it. Why didn't you prepare Mom's portion? This is discrimination, isn't it?" My son's cool demeanor caught both my mother and husband off guard, their surprise evident in their expressions. My mother-in-law, taken aback by his unexpected assertiveness, began to panic, denying any wrongdoing. "What did you hear?" "I didn't do anything," she stammered, but my son remained steadfast, unmasking her behavior with unwavering confidence. "You're always looking down on Mom, aren't you? People like that usually lack confidence or have nothing to be proud of, so they attack others to feel superior. It's a mean personality," he countered, his words piercing through her defenses. As my son continued to confront her, my mother-in-law found herself increasingly cornered, her usual tactics rendered ineffective against his insight. "That's true, isn't it? Everyone has an equal share of steak, but Mom has nothing." "This is clear discrimination," he asserted, his logic irrefutable. Normally, such confrontation would escalate into a fight, but my son's demeanor remained composed, far beyond his years. With each observation, my mother-in-law grew more subdued, her usual confidence waning in the face of his scrutiny. "You're panicking. Your eye movements, habits, and amount of sweat tell the story," my son continued, revealing his studies in psychology at Cambridge University and his keen observation skills. Despite her attempts to maintain composure, my mother-in-law couldn't conceal her discomfort, her facade crumbling under his scrutiny. Watching the exchange unfold, I marveled at my son's poise, while my husband observed in silence. As the tension lingered, my son's final words hung in the air, leaving us all to ponder the implications of his observations. The tension in the room was palpable as my son fearlessly confronted my mother-in-law. "Grandma, do you have any talents?" he asked, his tone cutting through the silence. My mother-in-law, usually quick with a retort, found herself at a loss for words as my son continued, unrelenting. "What you did, Grandma, was unfair. Mom excels in embroidery. Her work could even sell in England," my son praised, surprising me with his acknowledgement of my hobby. "You, Grandma, have none, yet you try to belittle Mom and assert dominance. Is it because you can't accept someone being superior?" As my son's words struck home, my mother-in-law remained speechless, unable to refute his observations. "And what about you, Dad? Why didn't you stand up for Mom when she needed help? Were you unable to stand up to Grandma because she's your mother? If so, why did you marry her?" My husband, caught off guard by our son's probing questions, could only offer silence in response. My son's relentless critique didn't spare anyone, exposing the underlying dynamics of our family dynamic. "You both just want to feel superior and look down on others," he concluded, leaving my husband and mother-in-law speechless. I couldn't help but feel proud of my son's maturity and insight. His suggestion to move to England together took me by surprise, but his reasoning soon became clear. "One of my classmates has a father who's a Hollywood actor. He saw pictures of your embroidery and wants to buy your work. There's a waiting list of over 200 people eager to purchase your pieces," he revealed, his smile contagious. Overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events, I couldn't help but feel grateful for my son's unwavering support and encouragement. With his guidance, perhaps a new chapter awaited us, one where our talents were celebrated, not diminished. As my son shared his unexpected news, both my mother-in-law and husband listened with astonished expressions. "Mom, I've taken the liberty of arranging something for you. They want you to open a store with your handmade crafts in the UK, my son explained, his eyes shining with excitement. The thought of turning my hobby into a job, especially in England, left me speechless. While my mother-in-law and husband expressed their disbelief, I found myself considering the possibility. If I was going to face harassment at my in-laws' house anyway, why not pursue my passion as a profession? Moreover, The strained relationship with my husband made staying there unbearable. So, I made up my mind. I'll give it a try. I accepted, much to the shock of my family. And then, I dropped a bombshell. I'm divorcing you. I'm tired of being oppressed by your mother. Let me be free. With that, my husband reluctantly agreed, and my mother-in-law ranted until the end, but I paid her no mind. The divorce was finalized without fuss, and I was finally free from the confines of my in-laws' house. Now, in England, I'm busy preparing to open a shop, insisting on crafting all the products by hand. Despite the initial fear of moving abroad, my son's wholehearted support makes the journey less daunting. Meanwhile, back home, I heard from my son that my former mother-in-law stumbled and ended up in the hospital. With her incapacitated, my ex-husband struggles to manage alone, taking on extra work to cover expenses. While it's a challenging time for them, I hope they find their way forward. As for me, I'm focused on the future, working on the final pieces for the shop's opening. With my son by my side, I feel confident in facing whatever challenges lie ahead. From rescuer to the rescued, our roles have shifted, but as a mother, I'll always support my son, just as he supported me.
My name's Michelle, and it all started when I was just a kid, 8 years old. My parents split up, and suddenly, I was living with my grandparents. Dad moved to another state, called a few times, then poof, vanished completely after a couple of years. Mom married some loaded businessman and jetted off to Europe. I remember the day Mom left. She hugged me tight, tears in her eyes. "I'll visit, baby. I promise," she said. I believed her. Kids are stupid like that sometimes. For a while, she kept her word. She'd sweep in once a year, always on my birthday. No husband, no new baby. Yeah, I forgot to mention, Mom had another kid. A sister I'd never met. But Mom would show up, arms loaded with gifts, smelling of expensive perfume and full of stories about her fabulous new life. Life went on. I went to school, made some friends, tried to be normal. But there was always this hole, you know? This empty space where my parents should have been. Grandpa and Grandma did their best to fill it. Grandpa would take me fishing on weekends, teach me how to bait a hook and cast a line. Grandma was always in the kitchen, cooking up a storm. She'd let me help, teaching me her secret recipes. But when I turned 13, Grandpa got sick. Cancer, the doctors said. It was quick, brutal. One minute he was there, telling his corny jokes and showing me how to fix a leaky faucet. The next, he was gone. The funeral was small. Just me, Grandma, and a handful of neighbors. Mom couldn't make it. Business emergency, she said over the phone. I wanted to scream at her, tell her that her own father was dead, for crying out loud. But I didn't. I just said, "Okay, Mom, I understand." When I turned 16, Mom's yearly visits suddenly stopped. No explanation, no apology, just radio silence. Our relationship dwindled down to occasional phone calls, usually initiated by me. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies. Graduated high school with decent grades, nothing spectacular but enough to get me into a local college. Those years flew by in a blur of classes, part-time jobs, and hanging out with friends. Before I knew it, I was tossing my cap in the air at graduation. After college, I landed a job at a local marketing firm. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of purpose. Life was okay. Not great, not terrible, just okay. I had my routine, my friends, my cozy little world in Grandma's house. But life, that sneaky bastard, had other plans. It started with Grandma forgetting things. Small stuff at first, where she put her glasses, what day it was. I brushed it off as old age. But then it got worse. She'd forget to turn off the stove, wander out of the house in her nightgown. The diagnosis came like a punch to the gut, Alzheimer's. I tried my best to take care of her, but it was hard. Watching the woman who raised me, who was my rock, slowly slip away, it was hell. The day she died, I was holding her hand. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. Michelle, she said, her voice barely a whisper, I love you, sweetheart. And then she was gone. I called Mom, choking back tears. Mom, Grandma's, she's gone. There was a long pause on the other end. Oh, Michelle, she finally said, her voice oddly flat. I'm so sorry. I can't get away right now. Work is just crazy. You understand, don't you? So I planned the funeral alone. Picked out the casket, arranged the flowers, wrote the eulogy. The service was small, just like Grandpa's. As I watched them lower the casket, I felt more alone than ever. After the funeral, I went back to Grandma's house, my house now, I guess. It felt too big, too empty. But I couldn't bear the thought of leaving. This was my home, filled with memories of the two people who'd raised me. Life went on. I threw myself into work, trying to fill the void Grandma left behind. Months passed, then a year, then two. Then, out of the blue, Mom called. Michelle, darling, she chirped, sounding oddly cheerful. I have wonderful news. Your sister's coming to America for college. Isn't that exciting? I blinked, caught off guard. Yeah, I guess. That's nice. Here's the thing, Mom continued, her voice taking on that syrupy sweet tone she used when she wanted something. She wants to go alone, but I'm worried about her. I was hoping she could stay with you. I felt my stomach drop. Mom, I don't think. Now, Michelle, she cut me off, her voice suddenly sharp. Let's not forget who that house really belongs to. I'm the direct heir, you know. I've been very generous letting you live there. The least you could do is look after your sister. I felt like I'd been slapped. But Grandma left the house to me, I said weakly. She wrote a will. Mom laughed, a cold sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, sweetie. You don't understand how these things work. Trust me, I could claim that house if I wanted to. But I'm not going to, as long as you help out with your sister. Understand? My mind was reeling. Could she really take the house? I didn't know enough about inheritance law to be sure. And the thought of losing my home, the last connection I had to Grandma and Grandpa. The day my sister arrived felt like the beginning of the end. I stood at the airport, holding a sign with her name, Chloe, feeling like an idiot. I'd only seen her in Mom's Facebook photos, always dolled up and posing like a model. I figured I'd spot her easily. Boy, was I wrong. I almost missed her when she strutted out of the arrival gate. This girl looked nothing like the sister I'd seen in pictures. She was, well, perfect. Too perfect. Like someone had ordered her from a celebrity lookalike catalog. Chloe? I called out, uncertain. She turned, her oversized sunglasses perched on a nose that was definitely not the one I'd seen in older photos. Oh my God, you must be Michelle, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. As she got closer, I could see the work she'd had done. Lips pumped up like life rafts, cheekbones that could cut glass, and a body that screamed at plastic surgeon's magnum opus. I felt like a potato next to her. As we waited for a porter, because apparently, that was a thing now, Chloe started rattling off demands like she was reading from a 5-year-old's Christmas list. So, like, in Europe, we have this amazing housekeeper who does everything. And a cook. You've arranged for that, right? She didn't wait for an answer. And I'll need my own car. Nothing cheap, obviously. Maybe a Mercedes. I stood there, mouth hanging open. Was this girl for real? Chloe, I said, trying to keep my voice level, I work a regular job. I can't afford. She cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. Ugh. Whatever. Mom will take care of it. Let's just go already. We made it to the parking lot, and I led her to my car, a beat-up old Honda that had seen better days. Chloe took one look at it and lost her mind. What kind of squalor is this? Each word was like a slap. You expect me to ride in that thing? Before I could respond, she whipped out her phone. Mom? Yeah, It's me. You will not believe what Michelle is trying to make me ride in. It's practically a death trap.
Huh? Yeah.
Okay, love you too. She hung up and turned to me, a smug smile on her face. Mom's arranging for a car service. You can take that rust bucket home yourself. An hour later, Chloe's fancy town car pulled up in front of Grandma's house. As soon as we stepped inside, Chloe's dramatics reached new heights. It smells like old people and mothballs in here, she shrieked. This is, like, a health hazard or something. We need to throw everything out and start over. I watched in horror as she stomped through the house, criticizing everything from the worn carpet to the family photos on the walls. When she reached my bedroom, she tossed her designer bag on the bed. This room's mine now. You can sleep, I don't know, wherever. The couch maybe? I stood there, speechless. This was my room. My sanctuary. The place where I'd cried myself to sleep after Grandma died, where I'd celebrated getting my first job, where I kept all my memories. But looking at Chloe's face, I knew arguing would be pointless. This girl was used to getting her way, and she'd make my life hell if I refused. A week after Hurricane Chloe made landfall in my life, I came home from work to find a shiny new Mercedes parked in my spot in the garage. My beat-up Honda had been unceremoniously shoved onto the street. What the hell? I muttered, stepping into the house. Chloe was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up. Oh, that's my new car. Mom got it for me. Your piece of junk was taking up valuable space. The next day, I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. I came home from work, exhausted and looking forward to a quiet evening. Instead, I walked into chaos. The house was filled with strange men in overalls, carrying out furniture and bringing in new pieces I'd never seen before. I found Chloe in the backyard, sipping a cocktail and supervising the mayhem like a pint-sized dictator. "Oh, you're home," she said, not bothering to look at me. "Don't worry, I've got everything under control." This dump needed a major overhaul. I told Mom it was unlivable, and she agreed. "You should be thanking me." I watched in horror as workers carried out Grandma's old rocking chair, the bookshelf Grandpa had built by hand, the coffee table where I'd done my homework for years. "Stop," I cried. "You can't throw those out." But it was too late. I could only watch helplessly as my memories were tossed into a dumpster. That night, I called Mom, tears streaming down my face. "How could you let her do this?" I sobbed. "This is my home." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mom spoke, her voice was cold. "Let's get one thing straight. That house belongs to me. I'm the rightful heir, and I'm letting you live there out of the goodness of my heart. If you can't appreciate that, maybe we need to reconsider this arrangement." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You wouldn't. "Just be grateful and keep quiet," Mom snapped. "And for God's sake, try to be nicer to your sister. She's doing you a favor." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling like my whole world was crumbling around me. The renovation lasted 2 hellish weeks. I came home every day to find more of my life erased, replaced by Chloe's idea of fashion. The warm, cozy home I'd grown up in was transformed into something out of a sterile design magazine. When it was finally over, I stood in the living room, feeling like a stranger in my own house. The familiar floral wallpaper was gone, replaced by stark white paint. Grandma's comfy old sofa had been swapped for a sleek leather monstrosity that looked about as comfortable as sitting on a rock. The family photos that used to line the walls were nowhere to be seen. As I retreated to my new room, the smallest bedroom, since Chloe had claimed the master for herself, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing more than just furniture. I was losing my connection to Grandma and Grandpa, to the life I'd built here. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Chloe decided to turn our house into party central. It started small, just a few friends over on a Friday night. But soon, it was like living in a nightclub that never closed. Every weekend, sometimes even on weeknights, the house would fill up with Chloe's college buddies. They were all cut from the same cloth as her, rich, entitled, and looking down their noses at everything and everyone they deemed beneath them. Which, apparently, included me. One night, I overheard Chloe talking to one of her friends in the kitchen. I wasn't eavesdropping, I swear. I was just trying to grab a quick snack before retreating to my room to escape the chaos. "Who's that?" I heard a girl ask. "She looks kinda old to be here." Chloe's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, that's just Michelle. She's like this distant cousin or something. Mom lets her work here as a maid." I slammed the fridge shut, not caring if they heard me. Tears stung my eyes as I stormed back to my room. How dare she? This was my house, damn it. The next morning, after Chloe had finally rolled out of bed around noon, I confronted her. "No more parties," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This has to stop. I'm tired of coming home to a house full of strangers. I'm tired of the noise, the mess, everything." She rolled her eyes. "God, you're such a buzzkill. No wonder you don't have any friends." "This isn't about friends," I said. "The neighbors are complaining. There are families with kids next door, elderly people who can't sleep because of your noise." "Not my problem," Chloe shrugged. "They should move if they can't handle a little fun." I was about to really let her have it when the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Johnson from next door, looking tired and frustrated. "Michelle, dear," she said, "I hate to be a bother, but these parties, they're getting out of hand. Last night, someone threw up in my rose bushes." I felt my face burn with shame. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Johnson. It won't happen again. I promise." As soon as I closed the door, I turned to Chloe. "That's it. No more parties. I mean it." The next day, I got a call from Mom. I should have known Chloe would go running to her. "Michelle," Mom's voice was sharp. "What's this I hear about you trying to control your sister?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, it's not like that. The parties are out of control. The neighbors are complaining." "The neighbors?" Mom cut me off. "Who cares about the neighbors? Your sister is trying to make friends, to have a normal college experience. And you're trying to ruin it for her." "But Mom." "No buts," she snapped. "I won't have you interfering with Chloe's studies or her social life. Do you understand me?" I felt something snap inside me. All the frustration, all the anger I'd been holding back, it all came rushing out. "No, Mom, I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't live like this anymore. Take your precious Chloe back to Europe if you want, but I'm done being her maid and punching bag." I hung up before she could respond, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd finally stood up for myself. Just when I thought I'd finally taken a stand, life threw me another curveball. A week after my ultimatum to Mom, she showed up on my doorstep unannounced. She looked different, tired, worn down in a way I'd never seen before. "Michelle," she said, her voice quivering. "We need to talk." I let her in, my mind racing. Was she here to take the house? To drag Chloe back to Europe? Instead, she dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. "I'm sick, Michelle," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "The doctors, they don't think I have much time left." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What? Mom, what are you talking about?" She went on to explain about some rare disease, using medical terms I didn't understand. But the gist was clear, Mom was dying. "That's why I need you, sweetheart," she said, gripping my hand. "Chloe, she's going to need someone when I'm gone. Someone to guide her, to be there for her. I need to know she'll have you. If you do, well, I'll make sure you're taken care of too. The house will be yours, free and clear." I blinked. "But, the house is already mine." "Grandma's will." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "As Grandma's daughter, I'm the primary heir. I could claim at least half the house if I wanted to." My head was spinning. I need time to think, I stammered. Mom nodded, wiping away a tear. Of course, dear. I'll be here for a couple of days. We can talk more. Those 2 days were surreal. Mom fawned over the renovations Chloe had done, praising her exquisite taste at every turn. I was silent, afraid to say something rude about it. But the weirdest part was Chloe's behavior. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Gone was the party girl, replaced by a perfect angel who helped with dishes and spoke in a sickeningly sweet voice. She even offered to make dinner one night, though I noticed she ordered takeout and tried to pass it off as her own cooking. Mom ate it up, literally and figuratively. See how thoughtful your sister is, she cooed. You two are going to be so good for each other. I wanted to scream. Couldn't Mom see through this act? But every time I opened my mouth to protest, I remembered Mom's words about the house. About her illness. Could I really risk losing everything? On the last night of Mom's visit, she cornered me in the kitchen. Have you thought about what I said? She asked, her eyes pleading. I took a deep breath. Yes, I said finally. I'll try for you. Mom's face lit up. She pulled me into a hug, something she hadn't done in years. Thank you, sweetheart. You don't know what this means to me. I can go back to Europe knowing Chloe will be in good hands. The ink had barely dried on Mom's departure when Hurricane Chloe made her grand return. The following week, I got off work early and headed home, looking forward to a quiet evening. As soon as I turned onto our street, I knew something was wrong. The bass from some EDM track was so loud it made my car windows vibrate. I burst through the front door to find my worst nightmare come to life. The house was packed with people, drunk college kids, sketchy-looking older guys, even a couple making out on my grandmother's antique table. Chloe, I screamed over the music. Where are you? I pushed through the crowd, dodging spilled drinks and grabbing hands. When I reached Chloe's room, I found the door locked. Without thinking, I kicked it open. Chloe was there, tangled up with some guy I'd never seen before. They both looked up at me, startled. What the fuck? Chloe shrieked. Get out. Something in me snapped. All the frustration, all the anger I'd been bottling up for months came pouring out. No, you get out, I roared. All of you. This party is over. I stormed through the house, turning off the music and shouting at people to leave. When they didn't move fast enough, I grabbed the phone. I'm calling the cops, I yelled. Anyone still here in 5 minutes is getting arrested. That got them moving. The house emptied in record time, leaving behind a mess that made my stomach turn. Chloe emerged from her room, her face twisted with rage. What the hell is wrong with you? She spat. You're just jealous because I know how to have fun. Well, guess what? I got kicked out of college, so now I can party whenever I want. And there's nothing you can do about it. Something inside me broke. Without thinking, I grabbed her arm and dragged her to the front door. Oh.
Yeah.
Watch me. I shoved her outside, then ran back to her room. I grabbed armfuls of her designer clothes and threw them out onto the lawn. You want to party? Go party somewhere else. I screamed, my voice hoarse. By now, neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion. I could hear Mrs. Johnson's voice, saying something about how it was about time I stood up for myself. But I didn't care about the audience. I was beyond caring about anything. I was still sitting on the floor, my back against the front door, when my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered, bracing myself for the storm. How dare you? Mom's voice crackled through the speaker, shrill with anger. Chloe just called me in tears. You ungrateful little reptile, after everything I've done for you. I cut her off with a laugh. A real, genuine laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. Everything you've done for me? I said, my voice surprisingly steady. That's rich, Mom. Really rich. Don't you take that tone with me, young lady, Mom snarled. I'll remind you that I'm the rightful heir to that house. I can take it away from you with a snap of my fingers. I felt a smile spread across my face. No, Mom, you can't. I talked to a lawyer yesterday. Grandma's will is ironclad. She left everything to me. Not you, not Chloe. Me. And there's nothing you can do about it. I heard Mom take a shaky breath. When she spoke again, her tone had changed completely. Now, Michelle, let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can work something out. If you take Chloe back, I'll make it worth your while. I have property in Europe, a villa by the sea, a vineyard. It could all be yours. I thought about it for a moment. A villa by the sea did sound nice. But then I remembered the peace I'd felt in the moments after I'd kicked Chloe out. The relief of finally standing up for myself. No villa was worth giving that up. Thanks, but no thanks, I said firmly. Grandma left me her savings. It's more than enough for me to live comfortably. I don't need or want anything from you. I hung up and immediately blocked both her number and Chloe's. As I sat there in the quiet house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I was truly free. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into cleaning up the mess Chloe had left behind, both literally and figuratively. I repainted walls, scrubbed floors, and slowly began to reclaim my space. One day, as I was chatting with Mrs. Johnson over the fence, she mentioned something that made my heart skip a beat. You know, she said casually, I saw some furniture at the flea market last week that looked just like your grandmother's old pieces. It was a shame to see it there, but I figured you must have sold it during the renovation. I thanked her and raced to my car. An hour later, I was wandering through the flea market, my heart pounding. And there they were, the grandma's old rocking chair, the bookshelf Grandpa had built, even the coffee table where I'd done my homework for years. I bought them all back for a fraction of what they were worth to me. The vendor looked at me strangely as I hugged the rocking chair, tears in my eyes, but I didn't care. Over the next few days, I transformed one of the spare bedrooms into a replica of Grandma's old living room. As I arranged the familiar furniture, hung the old family photos back on the walls, I felt like I was rebuilding more than just a room. I was rebuilding my connection to my past, to the people who had loved me unconditionally. Months have passed since then. The house is quiet now, peaceful. Sometimes, when I sit in Grandma's rocking chair, reading a book or just enjoying the silence, I think about everything that's happened. About Mom and Chloe and the life I thought I wanted. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt sometimes, knowing I've cut ties with the only family I had left. But then I look around at the home I've reclaimed, at the life I've built for myself, and I know I made the right choice.
I'm Kelly, and John and I met right after I finished college. He swept me off my feet with his charm and ambition. Before I knew it, we were married and living in the apartment he'd bought before our wedding. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours, and I loved every bit of it. Our daughter Sarah came along soon after. She was perfect, John's blue eyes and my curly hair. I thought we had it all, a loving family, a cozy home, and promising careers ahead of us. I landed a job as a secretary at a small but growing company. The pay wasn't great, but I enjoyed the work and got along well with my coworkers. John, on the other hand, was making his way up at his construction firm. He'd come home with stories of big projects and even bigger deals. I was proud of him, even if his long hours meant I was often alone with Sarah. But something changed in John over time. He'd come home late, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Who called, he'd demand, or why were you all dressed up? At first, I laughed it off, but soon his jealousy became suffocating. One night, after he'd grilled me about a work event, I confronted him. You think I'm cheating? With who, John? The mailman? He didn't crack a smile. Don't play dumb, Kelly. I see how men look at you. And that boss of yours? Is happily married with 3 kids, I cut him off. For God's sake, John, I'm your wife. I love you. But my words fell on deaf ears. The arguments became more frequent, each one chipping away at our marriage. I was faithful, always had been, always would be. But John's distrust was like a poison, seeping into every part of our lives. Through it all, Sarah remained blissfully unaware. At 10 years old, her world revolved around school, friends, and her iPad. I tried to shield her from our fights, but kids always know more than we think. The irony wasn't lost on me. John was the one always coming home late, always going on business trips. If anyone had reason to be suspicious, it was me. But I trusted him. I believed in our vows, in our love. Why couldn't he do the same? One night, after a particularly nasty fight, I found myself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. John's soft snores filled the room, but I felt miles away from him. How had we gotten here? When had love turned to suspicion, trust to accusation? I thought about leaving, about taking Sarah and starting over. But where would we go? What kind of life could I give her on a secretary's salary? And despite everything, I still loved John. I loved the man he used to be, the man I hoped he could be again. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life threw me another curveball. My mom, the rock I'd always leaned on, had a stroke. It hit out of nowhere, leaving us all reeling. Mom had always been the picture of health. After Dad died, she'd thrown herself into gardening and book clubs, determined to live life to the fullest. She lived in this gorgeous house in the fancy part of town, courtesy of Dad's life insurance and smart investments. I used to joke that she was living the life of a retired movie star. But that Tuesday morning changed everything. I got the call at work. Mom couldn't speak, couldn't move her left side. I rushed to the hospital, my heart in my throat. The next few weeks were a blur of hospitals, doctors, and terrifying medical jargon. I went to every top-notch clinic in the area, desperate for someone to tell me Mom would be okay. But the prognosis wasn't good. The stroke had left her bedridden, needing round-the-clock care. I was overwhelmed. How could I take care of Mom, manage my job, look after Sarah, and deal with John's jealousy all at once? It felt like drowning in slow motion. Then, out of the blue, John came up with an idea. "We should move into your mom's house," he said one night over dinner. I nearly choked on my pasta. "What?" "Think about it, Kelly," he continued, his eyes lighting up. "It's a great house in a fantastic neighborhood. Sarah would have her own room, maybe even a playroom. Your mom needs care, and you'd be right there. Plus, we could rent out this apartment for some extra cash." I had to admit, it made sense. Mom's house was way nicer than our apartment, and the idea of not having to commute to take care of her was appealing. But still, it felt weird. "I don't know, John," I hesitated. "It's Mom's house. We can't just barge in." "Ask her," he insisted. "I bet she'd love the company. It's better than a nursing home, right?" He had a point there. Mom had made it crystal clear she didn't want to end up in a glorified prison for old people, as she called it. Maybe this could work. The next day, I broached the subject with Mom. To my surprise, her face lit up at the idea. "Oh, Kelly," she said, her voice weak but excited. "I'd love that. This old house needs some life in it again." And just like that, it was decided. We were moving into Mom's house. As I started packing up our apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something big. I just didn't know if it was something good or bad. John was over the moon about the move. He kept talking about the garden he'd plant, the man cave he'd set up in the basement. Even Sarah seemed excited about having a bigger room. The move to Mom's house brought a whole new set of challenges. I quickly realized that taking care of a stroke patient was a full-time job, one I wasn't equipped to handle alone. After a week of sleepless nights and stress-filled days, I hired a nurse to help out during the day. Nurse Jenny was a godsend. She came in every morning at 8 and stayed until 6, taking care of Mom's basic needs. But evenings and nights were all on me. I'd come home from work, exhausted, only to start my second shift as mom's caretaker. The stroke had affected her speech, leaving her frustrated and often silent. I'd change her diaper, giving her as much dignity as I could in the process. Then came the sponge bath, the massage to keep her muscles from atrophying, the meds, and finally, dinner. It was grueling work, both physically and emotionally. Seeing my vibrant, independent mother reduced to this state broke my heart every day. But I did it because I loved her, because she'd have done the same for me. What I didn't expect was Sarah's reaction to her grandmother's condition. At 11, I thought she'd be old enough to understand, to help even. Boy, was I wrong. One evening, as I was heading to Mom's room, I saw Sarah dart past, her hand clamped firmly over her nose. "Sarah," I called out. "Where are you going? Don't you want to say hi to Grandma?" She shook her head violently. "No way. It smells gross in there." I was shocked. "Sarah, that's not a nice thing to say. Grandma needs our help and support right now." "I don't care," she spat back. "She's disgusting. I'm not going near her." Before I could respond, she stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, stunned and hurt. Where had my sweet little girl gone? I turned to John for support, but found none. "Not my problem," he'd say whenever I asked for help with Mom. I didn't sign up for this. It stung, but I couldn't entirely blame him. He hadn't signed up for this. None of us had. Still, I couldn't help but feel resentful as I watched him play video games with Sarah or take her out for ice cream while I was elbow deep in adult diapers and medication schedules. The one silver lining was seeing how close John and Sarah had become. They'd always had a good relationship, but now it seemed stronger than ever. I'd hear them laughing together in the living room or see them huddled over Sarah's homework at the kitchen table. It warmed my heart, even as it made me feel more isolated. 2 years flew by in a blur of bedpans, medications, and stolen moments of sleep. Mom's condition had stabilized, but she still needed constant care. I was exhausted, but I'd found a rhythm. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, everything fell apart. The phone rang while I was changing Mom's sheets. It was Mrs. Peterson, our old neighbor from the apartment complex. "Kelly, dear," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, "I thought you should know. I've been seeing John around quite a bit, with company of young women. Different ones. Always very pretty." I thanked her and hung up, my mind reeling. That night, I confronted John. "Oh, those are just potential tenants," he said smoothly. "I'm showing them the apartment." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But doubt had taken root, and it grew like a weed. A week later, I found the lipstick stain. It was on the collar of his white shirt, a perfect crimson kiss. My hand shook as I held it up to the light, trying to convince myself it was just a pen mark or a food stain. But I knew better. I waited until his next business trip to make my move. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door to our old apartment. The sounds coming from the bedroom confirmed my worst fears before I even opened the door. There was John, in our bed, with a woman I'd never seen before. They scrambled to cover themselves, but the damage was done. "Kelly," John exclaimed, not even having the decency to look ashamed. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at the scene before me, feeling my world crumble around me. "Look," John said, his voice cold, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But let's be honest, Kelly. I'm bored. You're always busy with your mother. This is exciting." His words cut deeper than any knife. Without a word, I turned and left, my mind already racing towards what I needed to do next. The divorce proceedings were ugly. John fought me every step of the way, but in the end, we stood before a judge, dividing up our life together like it was nothing more than assets on a balance sheet. Then came the hardest part, custody of Sarah. At 12, she was old enough to have a say, and her choice broke my heart. "I want to live with Dad," she declared, her voice steady. I don't want to be around grandma anymore. It's gross and depressing. And mom's always trying to make me help." The judge nodded sympathetically. He took into account John's higher income, the stability he could provide, and Sarah's clear preference. In the end, John was awarded primary custody. I was devastated, but I tried to focus on what was best for Sarah. John could give her opportunities one couldn't: private school, dance lessons, summer camps. We agreed on weekends and holidays for me, a schedule that looked so neat and tidy on paper, but felt like a gaping wound in my heart. As I watched Sarah pack up her things, chatting excitedly about her new room at Dad's new place, I felt like I was losing everything. My marriage was over, my daughter was leaving, and I was left with a house that felt more like a hospital than a home. The first few months after the divorce were tough, but I clung to my weekends with Sarah like a lifeline. We'd go to the movies, have ice cream in the park, or just hang out at home. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then, slowly, things began to change. Sarah started canceling plans. "I have a sleepover," she'd say. Or, "Dad's taking me to a concert." I tried to be understanding, to be the cool mom who didn't make a fuss. But each cancellation felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Soon, the cancellations became more frequent. Weeks would go by without a visit. My calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages were met with one-word responses, if I got any response at all. One Sunday, after yet another canceled visit, I decided to call Sarah directly. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I tried again. This time, a robotic voice informed me that the number I was trying to reach had blocked my calls. My hand shook as I dialed John's number. "What do you want, Kelly?" His voice was cold, annoyed. "John, I can't reach Sarah. She's blocked my number." "What's going on?" There was a long pause. Then, "Look, Kelly, Sarah doesn't want to talk to you right now. You need to respect that." "Respect that?" "She's my daughter." "She's also a person with her own feelings," John shot back. "And right now, she doesn't want to be around all that negativity at your place. I mean the sickness, the sadness. Sarah needs stability. She needs a normal family. Sarah sees Lisa as a mother figure now. She has a normal family life here. 2 parents, no sick relatives, no drama. Why can't you just let her be happy?" I couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down my face, and I was glad John couldn't see me. "Look," he continued, his voice softening slightly, "I know this is hard. But if Sarah doesn't want to see you right now, you need to respect that. Don't force it. It'll only push her away more." I wanted to scream, to argue, to demand my rights as a mother. But a small, rational part of my brain whispered that he might be right. If I pushed too hard, I might lose Sarah forever. I sank to the floor, phone clutched to my chest, and sobbed. My little girl, my Sarah, didn't want me anymore. Someone else was being her mother, kissing her goodnight, helping with homework, sharing all the moments I was missing. Mom found me there hours later, still on the floor. She'd managed to shuffle over with her walker, her face creased with concern. "Kelly," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I looked up at her, this woman who'd been my rock for so long, who I'd been taking care of for years. In that moment, our roles reversed again. I was the child, seeking comfort from my mother. "Oh, Mom," I cried, reaching for her hand. "I've lost her. I've lost my baby girl." Mom squeezed my hand, her touch still weak but full of love. "No, Kelly. You haven't lost her. She's just lost right now. She'll find her way back to you. You'll see." 14 years. It's amazing how time can fly by and drag on simultaneously. Mom's condition improved slightly over the years, she regained some mobility and speech, but caring for her remained a full-time job. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep, I felt a mixture of grief and, shamefully, relief. Suddenly, I found myself alone in this big, empty house. The silence was deafening. No more beeping medical equipment, no more schedules of medications and therapy sessions. Just me, rattling around in rooms full of memories. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice. I'd know it anywhere, even after all these years. Mom? It's Sarah. I was hoping we could meet to talk. We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. As I waited, my hands shaking around my coffee cup, I spotted a young woman entering. It took me a moment to realize it was Sarah. Gone was the gangly preteen I remembered. In her place stood a poised, beautiful young woman. "Hi, Mom," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. We made awkward small talk at first. She filled me in on her life, her job in marketing, her hobbies, her friends. Then she dropped the bombshell. "I'm getting married," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "Here's an invitation." My heart swelled with joy and a tinge of sadness. My little girl, getting married. And I'd missed so much. "Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you. Listen, if you need any help with the expenses." She cut me off abruptly. "Actually, Mom, that's kind of why I wanted to meet. I was hoping to talk about Grandma's inheritance. The house, her savings. I want them." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "Look, Mom," she said, leaning forward. "That house is in a great area. It's worth a fortune. After the wedding, Jake and I want to live there. Start our family there." Anger bubbled up inside me. "Sarah, you haven't set foot in that house in over a decade. You said it disgusted you. You called it a tomb." She waved her hand dismissively. "I was a kid then. I've grown up. Times have changed. And let's face it, I'm Grandma's only grandchild. She would have wanted me to have it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Wanted you to have it? Sarah, you didn't even come to her funeral. You didn't call, didn't write for years." "That's ancient history," she snapped. "The point is, that house should be mine. I deserve a comfortable life." "Deserve?" I was practically shaking with rage now. "You didn't lift a finger to help when Grandma was sick. I gave up my life to care for her. And now you think you deserve her house?" Sarah's face hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want to play it, I'll sue. I'll get what's rightfully mine." She stood up abruptly, snatching the wedding invitation from the table. "You know what? Forget it. You're not invited to the wedding. I don't need your negativity there. And I don't need your permission to take what's mine." As she stormed out of the cafe, I sat there, stunned. The daughter I'd loved, missed, and longed for all these years was gone. In her place was this stranger, cold and greedy. The days following that disastrous cafe meeting passed in a haze. I alternated between rage, grief, and a numbing emptiness. But as the dust settled, I realized something surprising. I felt relieved. The weight of hoping for reconciliation, of longing for a relationship with Sarah, had lifted. In its place was a strange sort of peace. I didn't attend Sarah's wedding. I didn't send a gift or a card. Instead, I spent that day volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding comfort in the unconditional love of abandoned pets who needed care. It felt fitting somehow. Curiosity got the better of me a few days later, and I found myself scrolling through Sarah's social media. There she was, radiant in white, smiling up at her new husband. For a moment, my heart clenched with the pain of what might have been. But then I saw it, a long, rambling post about her cruel mother who refused to attend her wedding, who withheld her rightful inheritance out of spite. I read it twice, marveling at the sheer audacity of her lies. Part of me wanted to comment, to set the record straight. But what would be the point? The people who mattered, the family who had seen me care for Mom all those years, knew the truth. As for everyone else? Well, their opinions of me based on a stranger's social media post were hardly my concern. A week later, my cousin Jeannie called. "Kelly, I thought you should know," she said, her voice a mix of anger and concern. "Sarah's been talking about suing you for your mom's estate." I sighed, unsurprised. "Let her try." "That's just it," Jeannie continued. "Apparently, she talked to a lawyer. He told her she doesn't have a leg to stand on. Your mom left everything to you, clear as day." I couldn't help but chuckle. Of course Mom had taken care of that. She'd always been the practical one. "Thanks for letting me know, Jeannie," I said. "But honestly, I don't care what Sarah does anymore. She's made her choices." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Then, I'm proud of you, Kelly. After everything you've been through, you deserve some peace." As I hung up the phone, I looked around the house, Mom's house, now my house. Every corner held memories, some painful, some beautiful. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe here. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden Mom had loved so much. It had gotten a bit overgrown in recent years, but I could see its potential. Maybe it was time to bring some life back to it. As I stood there, planning my next trip to the garden center, I realized something. The chapter of my life revolving around Sarah, the hope, the pain, the longing, was finally closing. But that didn't mean my story was over. Far from it. The garden was in full bloom when the call came. I'd spent the past few months throwing myself into its restoration, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing life. The roses Mom had loved so much were just starting to open, their scent filling the air as I pruned the bushes. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. "Hello? Mom?" Sarah's voice, thick with tears. "Mom, I need your help." I froze, pruning shears still in hand. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "I'm pregnant," she sobbed. "And we're struggling." "Mom, I need money. You have to help me. You can't leave your grandchild without anything." I listened silently as she rambled on, her words becoming more frantic, more accusatory. "You abandoned me, Mom. You never tried to contact me, never fought for me. And now you're going to abandon your grandchild too?" Something inside me snapped. Not with anger, but with a calm, unshakable resolve. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "That's enough." She fell silent, probably shocked that I'd interrupted her tirade. "I never abandoned you. I sent child support every month without fail. I called, I texted, I emailed. You blocked my number. You chose your stepmother. You made your decisions, and I respected them, even when they broke my heart. But Mom..." "No, Sarah, I'm not finished. You're an adult now, about to be a parent yourself. It's time you took responsibility for your choices and your life. I'm not your bank. I'm not your safety net. And I'm not going to be manipulated by lies and guilt trips." I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "If you need help, go to your father and stepmother. They're your real family, remember? The ones you chose. I've made my peace with that. Now you need to make peace with the consequences of your choices." "You can't do this," Sarah cried. "I'm your daughter." "Yes, you are," I said, my voice softening slightly. "And I'll always love the little girl you were. But I don't know the woman you've become. And I don't think I want to." I took a deep breath. "Goodbye, Sarah. I wish you and your child well. But please, don't contact me again." I ended the call before she could respond, my hand shaking slightly as I lowered the phone. For a moment, I stood there in the garden, surrounded by the blooming life I'd nurtured, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Then, slowly, I felt it lift. The last ties binding me to a painful past had been cut. The last what-ifs laid to rest. I looked around at the garden, at the house beyond. This was my life now. Not defined by loss or regret, but by the choices I made going forward. I picked up my pruning shears and turned back to the rosebush. There was still work to be done, still beauty to cultivate. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly, completely free. My name's Deborah, and let me paint you a picture of my family. There's my mom, Karen, yeah, fitting name, I know. She's all about her career and freedom. Then there's my dad, Tom, who's about as useful as a screen door on a submarine when it comes to parenting. My sister, Jessica, is 14 years older than me and couldn't care less about my existence. I came into this world as an unwelcome surprise. Mom was 42 when she found out she was pregnant with me. She thought it was menopause at first. Guess the universe has a twisted sense of humor. When she finally dragged herself to the doctor, it was too late to take care of it, if you catch my drift. From what I pieced together over the years, it went something like this. Tom, what the hell are we going to do? Mom probably screeched, pacing around their bedroom. Dad, being the spineless wonder he is, probably just shrugged. I don't know, Karen. Maybe we should talk to my dad? And that's how Grandpa Joe got roped into this mess. He's loaded and lives in Canada, but he flew down to play peacemaker. Karen, Tom, listen, he must have said, all calm and collected. I know this isn't what you planned, but it's happening. I'll help you out financially. Just give this child a chance. Mom, being the career-obsessed woman she is, probably huffed and puffed before finally agreeing. Fine, but I'm not letting this kid derail my life. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I, Deborah, came to be. Born premature, with a whole host of health problems, and into a family that saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. My early days were spent more in the hospital than at home. Mom couldn't be bothered to show up most of the time. It was Dad and Aunt Sarah who took turns keeping watch over my incubator. Aunt Sarah, now there's a saint if I ever met one. No kids or husband of her own, she latched onto me like a lifeline. While my own mother was probably off closing deals and climbing the corporate ladder, Aunt Sarah was there, holding my tiny hand through the incubator's holes, whispering words of encouragement. When I finally got to go home, Grandpa Joe swooped in again. Our house wasn't big enough for 2 kids, apparently. So, he bought us a new one. Growing up in that house was like living in a museum. Look, but don't touch. Don't make noise. Don't exist too loudly. I learned pretty damn quick that I wasn't part of the exhibit, just some unwanted artifact they couldn't get rid of. Mom and Dad were always working. When they weren't, they acted like I was some kind of leech, sucking the life out of them. We had a parade of nannies coming through the house. Some were nice, some weren't, but none of them stuck around long enough to matter. Jessica, my so-called sister, might as well have been a stranger living in the same house. 14 years is a hell of an age gap, and she made it clear she had no interest in playing big sister. I remember one time, I must have been about 6, I tried to hang out in her room while she was getting ready for college. Jessica, can I watch you do your makeup? I asked, peering around her doorframe. She barely glanced at me. No, Deborah. I'm busy. Go play with your toys or something. But I don't want to play alone, I whined. Can't we do something together? She slammed her mascara down on the dresser and whirled to face me. Look, we're not friends, okay? I'm not here to entertain you. Go bother Mom or Dad. That was pretty much the extent of our sisterly bonding. Mom was even worse. Every day when she got home from work, it was the same routine. She'd walk in, kick off her heels, and make a beeline for the liquor cabinet. Mom, I'd call out, excited to see her. Can we play a game? Or read a story? She'd pour herself a large glass of wine and sigh heavily. For God's sake, Deborah. Can't you see I need some peace and quiet? Go to your room and play by yourself. You're old enough to entertain yourself. And Dad? He'd promised Mom he'd take care of me if she had me. What a joke that turned out to be. He was always too busy or too tired to spend time with me. His favorite phrase became, not now, Deborah. I remember overhearing them argue about it once. I was supposed to be in bed, but I'd snuck out to get a glass of water. Tom, you promised you'd help with her, Mom hissed. I can't do this all on my own. What do you want from me, Karen? Dad shot back. I work all day too. I'm exhausted when I get home. She's always so needy. I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I'd heard enough to know where I stood in their eyes, a burden, an obligation, a mistake they were stuck with. After a while, I stopped trying. What was the point? I learned to entertain myself, to be quiet, to stay out of their way. I became a ghost in my own home, drifting from room to room, trying not to disturb the real family. The only bright spot in my life was Aunt Sarah. She lived nearby, and I started spending more and more time at her place. Weekends, holidays, any chance I got, really. With Aunt Sarah, I felt seen, heard, loved even. We'd spend hours doing puzzles, baking cookies, or just talking. She'd ask me about school, my friends, my hopes and dreams. Things my own parents never bothered with. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was 14, minding my own business, trying to survive another day in the emotional wasteland I called home, when my parents dropped a bombshell on me. Deborah, Mom said, her voice unusually chipper. We have wonderful news. Your sister Jessica is getting married, and she's pregnant. Dad chimed in, grinning like an idiot. We're going to be grandparents. I forced a smile, wondering why the hell they were telling me this like I should be jumping for joy. That's great, I managed to say. We're going to be very busy preparing for the wedding, Mom continued, not even noticing my lack of enthusiasm. So, we want you to stay with your Aunt Sarah for a while. I blinked, processing their words. They wanted to ship me off? Because of a wedding? Part of me wanted to be hurt, but honestly? It was the best news I'd heard in years. Sure, I said, trying not to sound too eager. I'd love to stay with Aunt Sarah. They looked relieved, probably expecting me to put up a fight. Shows how little they knew me. I packed my bags faster than you could say unwanted child and practically skipped to Aunt Sarah's house. Months flew by. The wedding preparations were in full swing, but I couldn't care less. I was too busy enjoying my new life. Aunt Sarah and I would cook together, watch movies, go for walks in the park. She'd help me with my homework, listen to me ramble about my day at school, and actually seemed interested in what I had to say. Before I knew it, a week before Jessica's wedding rolled around. It was also my 15th birthday. That morning, I woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Aunt Sarah singing off-key in the kitchen. I grinned, padding downstairs in my pajamas. Happy birthday, my dear, Aunt Sarah exclaimed, pulling me into a bone-crushing hug. I've got a surprise for you. She handed me a beautifully wrapped box. It's from your grandfather, he sent it yesterday. I tore into the wrapping paper, my eyes widening as I revealed a brand new smartphone, the latest model, no less. I dialed Grandpa Joe's number, my heart racing with excitement. Hello, birthday girl, his warm voice filled the line. Do you like your present? Like it? Grandpa, I love it. Thank you so much. We chatted for a bit, and then he asked the question I'd been dreading. So, how did your parents congratulate you? I hesitated, not wanting to admit the truth. Oh, I haven't seen them yet. I was planning to go home soon, actually. I'm sure they'll say something then. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, I see. Well, why don't you do a live broadcast when you go? I'd love to share in the joy. With a mixture of hope and dread churning in my stomach, I made my way back to my parents' house. The walk felt both too long and too short. As I turned onto our street, I took a deep breath and started the live broadcast on my new phone. Hey, Grandpa, I said, trying to sound cheerful. I'm on my way to see Mom and Dad now. Thanks again for the awesome phone. I chatted away as I walked, filling the silence with babble about my morning with Aunt Sarah and how excited I was about my birthday. But as I approached our house, a sense of unease crept over me. "Well, here we are," I announced to the camera, climbing the front steps. I hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. "Mom? Dad? I'm home." Silence greeted me. The house felt eerily quiet, almost abandoned. I frowned, panning the camera around the empty living room. Guess they're not down here," I muttered, more to myself than to Grandpa. "I'll check upstairs." I climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. As I reached the top, I noticed something odd. The door to my room was closed, which was unusual. I always left it open when I wasn't home. "That's weird," I said, reaching for the doorknob. "My door's never closed." I pushed it open and froze. The room that greeted me was not my room. At least, not anymore. The walls, once a soft lavender, were now a pale blue. My posters were gone, replaced by cutesy animal prints. My bed had vanished, and in its place stood a white crib. "What the hell?" I gasped, stumbling backward. The phone nearly slipped from my grasp as I spun around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This can't be right. This is my room." Just then, I heard a door open behind me. I whirled around to see my parents emerging from their bedroom, looking startled to see me. "Deborah?" Mom said, her eyes darting between me and the phone in my hand. "What are you doing here?" I barely registered her words, still reeling from the shock of my transformed room. "What happened to my room?" I demanded. "Why is it blue? Where's all my stuff?" Dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Well, you see, Deborah, we've decided to give this room to your sister's baby. Our first grandson." Mom nodded, a smile plastering itself across her face. "Yes, isn't it wonderful? Jessica's having a boy, the son your father's always dreamed of having. He'll be living here with us after the wedding." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But where am I supposed to sleep? Where's my stuff?" "Oh, we packed up your things," Dad said, waving his hand dismissively. "They're in boxes downstairs. You should take them with you when you leave. We don't want them cluttering up the place." I stared at them, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. "Leave? What do you mean, leave? This is my home." Mom's smile faltered for a moment before she forced it back into place. "Deborah, dear, you have to understand. With Jessica and her husband moving in, and the baby on the way, well, there's just no room for you here anymore." I stood there, frozen in disbelief, my mind reeling from what I'd just heard. Suddenly, a surge of anger welled up inside me, pushing through the shock. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No, I won't leave. This is my home too. You can't just throw me out like I'm nothing." Mom's fake smile vanished, replaced by a look of irritation. "For heaven's sake, Deborah. Don't be difficult." "Difficult?" I spat back. "It's my birthday, and you're kicking me out. You didn't even remember, did you?" Dad rolled his eyes. "Your birthday? Is that what this tantrum is about? We don't have time for this nonsense." Their callousness hit me like a physical blow. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. "How can you be so cruel? I'm your daughter. A daughter we never wanted," Mom snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Do you have any idea how much you've cost us? How much attention you've demanded? We're exhausted, Deborah." Dad nodded, his face twisted with annoyance. "We didn't want a second child. You were a mistake, an accident. And now, we finally have a chance at the family we always wanted." Their words cut deep, each one a knife to my heart. I watched in stunned silence as they grabbed the bags they'd packed with my belongings and started shoving them out the front door. "There," Mom said, dusting off her hands. "Now take your things and go to your precious Aunt Sarah. She loves you so much, let her deal with you." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. "What are you waiting for?" Dad barked. Get out. We have a wedding to prepare for, and we don't need you here complicating things. That's when the dam broke. Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of their rejection crashed over me. How could you do this to me? I sobbed. I'm your child. Stop it, Mom hissed, glancing nervously at the windows. You're embarrassing us. The neighbors will hear. Good, I shouted through my tears. Let them hear. Let everyone know what kind of people you really are. Dad grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. That's enough, he growled, practically dragging me to the door. Get out, now. And don't come back. With one final shove, I found myself on the front porch, my bags scattered around me. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I don't know how long I sat there, sobbing on the steps. Eventually, I gathered my things and started the long, miserable walk back to Aunt Sarah's. The bags felt impossibly heavy, weighed down by more than just my possessions. As I trudged along, sniffling and wiping my eyes, a familiar voice suddenly cut through my misery. Deborah, can you hear me? I jumped, looking around wildly before realizing the voice was coming from my phone. With a jolt of horror, I remembered the live broadcast. Grandpa had seen everything. Grandpa? I stammered, lifting the phone with trembling hands. Oh, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Look, we'll sort this out, I promise. For now, go to Sarah's. We'll see each other at the wedding in a few days, okay? Try to enjoy your birthday. Somehow, his words managed to calm me down a little. By the time I reached Aunt Sarah's, my tears had mostly subsided. She took one look at me, standing there with my bags and puffy eyes, and pulled me into a fierce hug. Aunt Sarah, bless her heart, insisted we celebrate my birthday properly. She let me invite a few friends over, baked a cake, and did her best to make the day special. The day of Jessica's wedding arrived. I hadn't been invited, of course, but Aunt Sarah insisted we go anyway. So there I was, decked out in my best dress, feeling like an imposter as we walked into the reception hall. I spotted Grandpa Joe almost immediately. He was sitting at a table near the front, his back ramrod straight, radiating an energy that made me nervous. Before we even had time to say hello, the newlyweds made their grand entrance. Jessica looked radiant in her white gown, beaming as she clung to her new husband's arm. Mom and Dad followed, pride evident in their faces, and I felt a pang in my chest. The reception progressed with toasts, dinner, and the usual festivities. As the congratulatory speeches began during the festive dinner, Grandpa Joe suddenly stood up. I have something to say, he announced, his voice ringing out across the hall. Every head turned. Jessica and her groom looked confused. Mom and Dad went pale. Grandpa Joe marched to the front of the room, commandeering the microphone from the stunned best man. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I apologize for interrupting this joyous occasion, but there's a grave injustice that needs to be addressed. He then launched into a detailed account of how my parents had treated me. He spared no detail, from their resentment of my birth to the cruel way they'd kicked me out on my birthday. With each word, the guests' expressions changed from confusion to shock to outrage. Mom tried to interrupt, her face beat red. Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Her new husband looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. The guests were whispering among themselves, shooting scandalized looks at my parents. Grandpa turned to face my parents directly, his voice cold as ice. So let me make this clear. I'm changing my will. Every cent I have will go to Sarah and Deborah. Tom, Karen, Jessica, you're cut off. Completely. The reception hall erupted into chaos. Mom let out a strangled cry, Dad's face turned an alarming shade of purple. Jessica wailed something about her ruined wedding. But Grandpa wasn't done. He walked over to where Aunt Sarah and I sat, shell-shocked by the spectacle. Come on, girls, he said gently. We're leaving. We don't need to stay where we're not wanted. In a daze, I stood up and followed him. As we walked towards the exit, I could feel every eye on me. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental. I kept my gaze fixed on Grandpa's back, willing myself not to cry. The morning after the wedding disaster, I woke up to the sound of insistent knocking on Aunt Sarah's front door. Bleary-eyed and still processing the events of the previous day, I stumbled downstairs to find Mom and Dad on the porch, looking a strange mix of desperate and contrite. "Deborah, sweetie," Mom cooed, her voice sickeningly sweet. "We need to talk. We want you to come home, honey. We're so sorry about everything. We love you, we really do." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. "Love me? You kicked me out. You said I was a mistake." They launched into a litany of apologies and explanations, each one more pathetic than the last. But as I stood there, listening to their desperate pleas, a realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about me at all. "This is about the inheritance, isn't it?" I said, cutting off Dad mid-sentence. Their faces fell, confirming my suspicions. They didn't want me back, they wanted Grandpa's money. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I don't want to see either of you ever again." I slammed the door in their faces, leaning against it as I tried to calm my racing heart. But my parents weren't done. Over the next few days, they showed up repeatedly, each time more insistent than the last. They called, they sent emails, they even tried to rope in other family members to convince me. It all came to a head about a week after the wedding. I was home alone when I heard a commotion outside. To my horror, I saw Mom and Dad trying to force their way past Aunt Sarah, who had just returned from the grocery store. "She's our daughter," Dad was yelling. "You can't keep her from us." Something in me snapped. I'd had enough of their manipulation, their lies, their sudden concern for my well-being now that money was on the line. "Aunt Sarah," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want you to be my legal guardian." The words hung in the air for a moment. Then Aunt Sarah's face broke into a wide smile. "Oh, sweetie, I'd be honored." With Aunt Sarah's help, we contacted a lawyer the very next day. The process wasn't easy, there were forms to fill out, interviews to conduct, and a court hearing to attend. But through it all, I held on to one piece of evidence that I knew would make all the difference: the video from my ill-fated birthday visit home. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt sick to my stomach. My parents were there, of course, playing the role of concerned, loving parents to the hilt. But when the judge asked for evidence, and we played that video, the one where they kicked me out, where they told me I was unwanted, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. I'll never forget the look on the judge's face as she watched my parents callously toss me aside. When the video ended, she turned to them, her expression hard. "In all my years on the bench," she said, "I've rarely seen such a clear case of parental neglect and emotional abuse." The ruling came swiftly after that. Aunt Sarah was granted full legal guardianship, and my parents' rights were terminated. As the gavel came down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was free of their toxic influence. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. Just when I thought the drama was finally over, Grandpa Joe called us over to his lawyer's office. As we sat in the plush leather chairs, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves and the smell of old paper, I couldn't help but feel nervous. "Deborah, Sarah," Grandpa began, his voice solemn but his eyes twinkling, "I want you both to know that I've made some changes to my will." He nodded to his lawyer, who pulled out a thick document. "As I promised at the wedding," Grandpa continued, "I've decided to leave my entire estate to you two. Tom and Karen are officially disinherited." I sat there, stunned. I knew Grandpa had threatened this at the wedding, but I never really believed he'd go through with it. As we left the lawyer's office, my head spinning with the implications of what had just happened, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "How could you do this to me?" she screeched as soon as I answered. "You've ruined everything." I pulled the phone away from my ear, wincing at her volume. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You turned Grandpa against us. Now he's leaving everything to you and Aunt Sarah. It's not fair." I want my share too. I felt a flash of anger. After everything that had happened, after the way they'd all treated me, she had the nerve to demand money? Look, Jessica, I said, trying to keep my voice level, I didn't ask for any of this. It was Grandpa's decision, not mine. But you must have manipulated him somehow, she insisted. You've always been jealous of me. This is your revenge, isn't it? I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head before responding. Jessica, I'm sorry you feel that way. But I had nothing to do with Grandpa's decision. If you want to change his mind, you'll have to talk to him yourself. Maybe I will, she huffed. And don't think this is over, Deborah. You can't just waltz in and steal what's rightfully ours. As she hung up, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but mostly just exhaustion. And then I decided to focus on my future. I threw myself into my studies, determined to ace my exams and get into a good college. Aunt Sarah helped me research schools, majors, and scholarship opportunities. Sure, my family situation was far from perfect. There would probably be more drama with Jessica, my parents, and the inheritance down the line. But for now, I had a loving home with Aunt Sarah and Grandpa Joe, a bright future ahead of me, and the strength to face whatever challenges came my way. My name is Jennifer, and I've spent most of my life alone. My parents died in a car accident when I was just 5, leaving me to be raised by my grandmother. She was my everything, my anchor, my guide, my only family. When she passed away shortly before my wedding, I thought I'd found a new family in Mark, my then fiancé. We'd been married for 2 years, living in a beautiful 2-story townhouse I'd rented before our wedding. It was in a perfect location, and when we got married, it made sense to stay there. Mark moved his things in, and I genuinely believed we had the perfect setup. I worked from home as an assistant editor-in-chief at a major publishing house, which meant I could manage both my career and our home life effectively. You know what's great about this house? Mark would often say, sprawled on our couch after dinner. It's big enough for family visits. My folks would love it here. I'd smile nervously whenever he brought this up. Yeah, maybe, I'd reply, trying to hide my discomfort. The thought of house guests made me uneasy, but I never really expressed this to Mark. Everything changed the day his sister Sarah showed up unannounced with her 2 elementary school-aged kids, Tommy and Lisa. I still remember opening the door and seeing them standing there, luggage in hand. Surprise! Sarah exclaimed, pushing past me into the house. The kids need some quality time with their uncle. You know, male influence and all that. I stood there, frozen, as her children, Tommy and Lisa, ran straight to our pristine living room with muddy shoes. Mark appeared behind me, beaming with joy. Jen, isn't this great? The kids can stay in the guest room, and Sarah can take the office. The office? I stammered. But that's where I work. You can work anywhere, honey, he said, already carrying their bags upstairs. It's just for the school holidays. That first night, as I lay awake listening to the chaos downstairs, Sarah's kids fighting over the TV remote, Sarah complaining about the dinner I'd made, I had no idea this was just the beginning. I couldn't have known that this moment would set in motion a series of events that would completely unravel my marriage. The next few weeks were absolute hell. Sarah's kids were completely out of control. I'd never seen children behave this way before, and I'd edited plenty of young adult books about troubled teens. Hey, stupid lady, Tommy would yell at me across the breakfast table, his hands covered in what I hoped was just mud. I want pancakes. Tommy, I'd try to reason with him, first, please wash your hands, and second, my name is Jennifer or Aunt Jen. Whatever, dummy. Lisa would chime in, deliberately spilling her orange juice on the floor. Mom says we don't have to listen to you, because you're not really family. I'd look at Sarah, expecting her to correct them, but she'd just sit there scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up to say things like, kids will be kids, or they're just expressing themselves. One particularly trying morning, I was trying to meet a crucial deadline for work when Sarah barged into my makeshift workspace in the living room. The kids need lunch, she announced, as if I was her personal chef. Something organic and sugar-free. Maybe some hand-pressed juice and gluten-free sandwiches? Sarah, I have a really important deadline. I started. Oh please, she interrupted, rolling her eyes. You just sit at home all day typing. That's not real work. Unlike being a mother. The days blurred together in an endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, and trying to salvage my work responsibilities. The kids would trash their rooms daily, wipe their dirty hands on the walls, and throw food during meals. The worst part? Mark seemed completely blind to it all. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the school holidays ended. The morning Sarah and the kids left, I took Mark aside for a serious conversation. Mark, we need to talk about what just happened, I said, still exhausted from the ordeal. What do you mean? It was great having them here, he replied, genuinely puzzled. No, it wasn't. Your sister's kids were completely disrespectful, she didn't lift a finger to help, and I couldn't get any work done. Please, don't invite anyone else without discussing it with me first. Mark looked taken aback, but nodded. Okay, honey, I promise I'll talk to you first next time. I spent the next few weeks trying to restore both our home and my mental health. The walls needed repainting, the furniture required deep cleaning, and my work deadlines had piled up dangerously high. During this time, I also remembered something important about our lease agreement. Mark, I said one evening, I should mention that our landlord is really strict about guests. The agreement has specific clauses about it. He waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry about that. Actually, why don't we just put the lease in my name? That way, you won't have to stress about it anymore. We transferred the lease to his name the next day, though I continued to pay the rent from my account as usual. 6 months passed, and life had finally returned to normal. Or so I thought. I was catching up on work one Tuesday morning when I heard Mark's excited voice from the kitchen. Of course you can stay with us, Mom. We have plenty of room. You and Dad can take the master bedroom. We'll move downstairs to the guest room. My stomach dropped. I rushed to the kitchen just in time to hear his mother saying something about sewage repairs and water being cut off at their house. Mark, I whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve. Can we talk about this first? He covered the phone with his hand. Mom and Dad need a place to stay while their plumbing gets fixed. What's there to talk about? That evening, we had our first real fight in months. You promised me, Mark. You promised we'd discuss these things together. What do you want me to do, Jen? He snapped. They're my parents. I can't leave them without running water. Stop being so selfish. The next morning, my in-laws arrived with enough luggage to survive an apocalypse. Within hours, my mother-in-law, Linda, had rearranged my kitchen cabinets, criticized my choice of cleaning products, and commented on the layer of dust on the windowsills. Jennifer, dear, she called from the living room, where she was directing her husband Bob about furniture placement. When you're done with whatever it is you do on that computer, we'll need dinner. Something substantial, not those silly salads you make. I gritted my teeth. Linda, I'm actually working right now. I have a deadline. Working? She laughed, looking at Bob. Sitting at home all day isn't work. Now, about dinner. Days blurred together. I'd try to write emails while Linda stood over my shoulder, commenting on my posture. I'd be editing manuscripts while she demanded I do the laundry properly. Apparently, I'd been folding sheets wrong my entire adult life. Mark, I pleaded one evening, I need help. I can't keep up with everything. You're right, he said, and for a moment, I felt relief. I should take some time off work. I smiled, grateful, until he added, Dad and I are thinking about a fishing trip. Get some real father-son bonding time. A fishing trip? I couldn't believe my ears. That's not what I meant. But he was already packing his gear, excited as a kid at Christmas. The next morning, he and Bob left for their bonding experience, leaving me alone with Linda. Well, she said, hands on her hips as the door closed behind them. Since you're not busy with that little computer job of yours, we can finally get this house properly organized. I looked at my laptop, where 3 urgent emails from my boss sat unanswered, then at Linda's determined face. In that moment, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in my marriage, and not for the better. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, only a day after Mark and his father left for their fishing trip, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sarah standing there with Tommy and Lisa, surrounded by even more luggage than last time. Surprise! She pushed past me, kids in tow. The children have been crying for their grandparents. We couldn't stay away. I stood in the doorway, my mind refusing to process what was happening. Linda appeared behind me, squealing with delight. My babies! She hugged the children. Sarah, darling, you're just in time. Jennifer was about to start dinner. I wasn't about to start dinner. I was about to join a critical video call with my publishing team. But nobody cared about that. Actually, I have an important work meeting. Always with the excuses, Sarah rolled her eyes. Mom told me you just sit at that computer all day pretending to work. The next few days were absolute torture. While Mark and Bob were off enjoying their fishing trip, I was trapped in a house of chaos. The kids ran wild through every room, leaving destruction in their wake. Sarah spent her days video calling friends, complaining about my cooking. Linda criticized everything I did. Nobody lifted a finger to help, but they all had opinions about how I wasn't doing enough. When Mark and his father finally returned from their fishing trip 5 days later, I was ready for a serious conversation. I'd rehearsed it in my head, firm but fair, explaining how impossible the situation had become. But before I could get a word in, Mark burst through the door, beaming with joy. Isn't this amazing? He spread his arms wide, taking in the chaos of our once peaceful home. The whole family together. We should do this more often. I felt the room spin. More often? Yeah, Dad and I were talking while fishing, and you know what would be great? If we all lived together for a while. Like a real family. The children ran past us, tracking mud across the floor I'd just cleaned. Sarah yelled from upstairs about needing fresh towels. Linda appeared to remind me it was almost dinner time. Mark, I managed to choke out, can we talk privately? Later, honey, he waved me off. Dad's showing everyone the pictures from our trip. That night, I lay awake in our cramped guest room, listening to the chaos above. Our bedroom, now occupied by his parents, creaked with every movement. Sarah's kids were still running around despite the late hour. Someone was using the microwave. Again. My phone buzzed with another email from my boss, second missed deadline this week. We need to talk. My life had become a nightmare. I was surrounded by strangers who treated me like their personal maid, children who destroyed everything they touched, and a husband who couldn't, or wouldn't, see what was happening. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to get some work done before everyone else got up. I'd started barricading myself in the home office, my last sanctuary in this chaos. But when I opened the door, my heart sank. Sarah was sitting at my desk, my laptop open in front of her, while Tommy and Lisa sprawled on the floor surrounded by construction paper, glue, and what looked like half the garden's worth of dirt. Oh good, you're up. Sarah didn't even look at me. The kids have a school project due tomorrow. We're using your laptop for research. That's my work laptop, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I have deadlines. Don't be so selfish, Sarah cut me off. This is for their education. You can do your little typing job later. I found Mark in the kitchen, grabbing his briefcase for work. Mark, they've taken over my office. They're using my laptop. I can't work. Not now, Jen, he rushed past me, checking his watch. I'm late for a meeting. Just share the laptop, okay? It's for the kids' school. Feeling dizzy, I headed to the bathroom. Maybe a shower would help me think clearly. But when I opened the bathroom door, I nearly vomited. The toilet was overflowing with mud and dirt. Footprints tracked through the mess across the tile floor. Handprints decorated the walls. "Oh yeah," Lisa's voice piped up behind me. "We needed somewhere to mix the dirt for our project. Tommy said the toilet would be good, 'cause it has water already." I stood there, staring at the destruction. Somewhere in the house, I could hear Linda complaining about lunch plans. Sarah was yelling at the kids to get more supplies for their project. The toilet gurgled ominously. Something inside me snapped. Without saying a word, I cleaned up the bathroom. Every swipe of the mop, every scrub of the walls felt like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. When I finished, I went to our bedroom, the guest room now, and looked around at what my life had become. The next morning, I waited until Mark left for work. I listened to his car pull out of the driveway, counted to 60, then moved with quiet efficiency. I packed a small bag, some clothes, toiletries, my phone charger. The only thing I really needed was my laptop, which I managed to recover from the office while Sarah was in the kitchen complaining about the breakfast I hadn't made. Nobody noticed when I slipped out the front door. Nobody called out to ask where I was going. The hotel I checked into wasn't fancy, but it had 3 things my house no longer offered: silence, privacy, and peace. For the first time in weeks, I could hear myself think. I took the longest shower of my life, ordered room service, and actually managed to get some work done. I kept expecting my phone to explode with messages. Surely Mark would notice I was gone. Surely he'd be worried. Surely someone would wonder where the person who did all the cooking and cleaning had disappeared to. But as the hours ticked by, my phone remained silent. No missed calls. No frantic text messages. No concern at all for where I'd gone or why. After 3 days of silence, I decided to go home. Not because I missed them, but because I needed answers. As I approached our front door, I heard music and laughter spilling out into the street. What I walked into felt like a punch to the gut. A full-blown party was in progress. Streamers hung from the ceiling, plates of food covered every surface, and dozens of unfamiliar faces filled our living room. Nobody noticed me slip inside. Through the crowd, I spotted Mark dancing with Sarah in the middle of the room, both of them laughing. More relatives I'd never met were sprawled across our furniture, drinking and chatting as if they owned the place. I moved through the party like a ghost, until I found myself near the kitchen. That's when I heard them. And the best part is, my mother-in-law was saying to a woman I didn't recognize, "We didn't have to spend a dime on hotels or restaurants. No repairs needed at our house at all, we just needed a change of scenery." The woman chuckled. "Clever. And you got a free housewife out of the deal too." "Yes, that Jennifer," Linda's voice dripped with contempt. "Though she's not much of a housewife. Always complaining about her work. Can you believe she actually ran away 3 days ago? Not that anyone misses her cooking." They burst into laughter. I stood frozen, their words hitting me like physical blows. It had all been a lie. The broken sewage system, the urgent repairs, all of it fabricated so they could have a free vacation at my expense. Something inside me snapped. I pushed through the crowd until I found Mark, still dancing and drinking without a care in the world. "We need to talk," I grabbed his arm. "Now." He followed me to the hallway, looking annoyed at being pulled away from his fun. "Your mother just told everyone there were never any repairs needed at their house," I said, my voice shaking. "They just wanted a free place to stay. Did you know about this?" He shrugged, and in that casual gesture, I saw our entire marriage crumble. So what if I did? Their family, they needed a break. A break? I'm the one who cooked for them, cleaned for them, while they insulted me and took over my home. And you knew it was all a lie? "Oh, stop being so dramatic," he sneered. "You don't understand because you're an orphan." The word orphan hit me like a slap. Images flashed through my mind, the car accident that took my parents when I was 5, my grandmother raising me alone, her empty seat at our wedding. "That's right," he continued, his voice cruel. You're just a lonely loser who doesn't understand what it means to have a real, close-knit family. Maybe if you had one, you wouldn't be such a selfish bitch. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Without a word, I walked to our former bedroom and gathered what remained of my belongings. Behind me, the party continued as if nothing had happened. No one tried to stop me. Not even Mark. I'd barely settled into my hotel room and started apartment hunting online when my phone rang. Seeing the landlord's number flash across my screen made my stomach clench. Jennifer, Mr. Peterson's voice was tight with tension. I've been receiving numerous complaints from the neighbors about your property. My former property, I corrected him. I don't live there anymore. The lease was transferred to Mark Thompson, my husband, remember? There was a heavy pause on the line. Yes, well. The neighbors are reporting loud parties, excessive noise at all hours, children running wild in the common areas, and multiple unauthorized residents. That sounds terrible, I said, keeping my voice neutral. But as I said, it's not my responsibility anymore. Mr. Peterson sighed deeply. I want you to know that I'll be forced to take the harshest measures allowed under the lease agreement. I'm only calling you as a courtesy because you were such a good tenant for so long. I appreciate the heads up, I replied, but you'll need to discuss this with Mark. After hanging up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't bother warning Mark about the call. Let him deal with the consequences of his choices for once. I found a lovely one-bedroom apartment in a quiet building across town. The landlady was a retired teacher who lived downstairs and appreciated that I worked from home. It's good to have someone around during the day, she said. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without being awakened by midnight snacks or early morning chaos. Then, 2 weeks into my peaceful new life, Mark called. Jen, we're in serious trouble, he blurted before I could speak. Peterson showed up today with a stack of papers. He's demanding double rent for the month, plus some ridiculous fine. I continued typing my email, letting him ramble. Did you know it was against the lease to have overnight guests? Or parties? Why didn't you tell me? I did tell you, I replied calmly. Multiple times. You didn't want to listen. Well, I didn't read the whole thing when we transferred it, he admitted. Look, can you talk to Peterson? He liked you. Maybe you can explain. Explain what? I cut him off. That you moved your entire extended family into a rental property without permission? That you've been hosting parties and disturbing the neighbors? That you ignored every warning I gave you about the lease agreement? The neighbors called the police last night, he continued desperately. Mom and Dad got fined for noise violations. Sarah's kids were running through the building at midnight and someone complained. We need your help, Jen. You know how to handle these things. I thought about all the times I'd handled things for them. All the times I'd cleaned up their messes, literal and figurative. No, I said simply. No? What do you mean, no? I mean no. You have a whole big, close-knit family there to help you. Remember? The real family you said I wouldn't understand because I'm just a lonely orphan? Goodbye, Mark. I hung up mid-plea, turned my phone off, and went back to work. For the first time in months, I smiled. Sometimes karma doesn't need any help at all. The day after Mark's desperate call about the fines, my phone rang again. His name flashed on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. But something told me I should hear whatever he had to say. They're gone, he said without preamble. Mom, Dad, Sarah, the kids, they all left. Come home, Jen. We can go back to how things were. I almost laughed at the suggestion. Go back? As if the past months could be erased like crayon marks from a wall. There's no going back, Mark. Please, his voice cracked. Peterson's asking for so much money. Maybe we could split the costs? Half the fine and the double rent? I can't afford it on my own. This time I did laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even me. Oh, now you want to split things fairly? Where was this concern for fairness when I was cooking and cleaning for your entire family? When they took over my office, my home, my life? But what about your real, close-knit family? I interrupted. Surely they'll help you pay. After all, I'm just a lonely orphan who doesn't understand family values, remember? A week later, I heard through our mutual friend Amy that Peterson had evicted Mark. She told me he'd shown up at his parents' doorstep with his bags, only to be turned away. The irony was almost poetic. Mark's final call came as I was finishing dinner in my peaceful new apartment. My divorce papers lay on the coffee table, filed that morning. Please, Jen, he begged. I've lost everything, the house, my family. I made a mistake. We could start over. I've learned my lesson. I looked around my small but tranquil apartment. My laptop sat on my desk where I'd left it. My coffee mug was exactly where I'd placed it. No crayon on the walls, no mud on the floors, no chaos in the kitchen. You're right about one thing, Mark, I said quietly. You did lose everything. But you lost it yourself, one choice at a time. Every time you chose your family over our marriage. Every time you dismissed my feelings. Every time you watched them disrespect me and said nothing. I can change. I've already filed for divorce, I cut him off. And no, this isn't up for discussion. You showed me exactly who you are and what I mean to you. Consider it a gift, now I'll never waste another moment wondering. I hung up and blocked his number. Outside my window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. On my desk, a fresh manuscript waited for my attention. My phone remained blessedly silent. Sometimes, I think about what my grandmother would say if she could see me now. She always told me that family isn't about blood, it's about love, respect, and loyalty. She was right, of course. She usually was. I might be an orphan, as Mark so cruelly pointed out, but I finally understood something important. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely. And sometimes, the family you're born with or marry into isn't the family you deserve. Sometimes, you have to save yourself. And that's exactly what I did. I was always the other daughter. The one who didn't need constant attention. While my younger sister Sarah battled asthma, I battled invisibility in our own home. Every morning started the same way, Mom rushing to Sarah's room to check her breathing, while I got myself ready for school. Sarah, honey, how are you feeling today? Let me check your temperature, Mom would say, her voice dripping with concern. Don't forget your inhaler. Do you want me to call Dr. Thompson? I remember standing in the doorway, already dressed and ready for school, watching this daily ritual. My lunch was always whatever I could throw together myself, usually just a sandwich and an apple. Sarah got specially prepared meals with all her favorite foods. Dad wasn't much different. He worked extra hours to pay for Sarah's medical bills, and when he was home, his attention went straight to her. How's my little fighter doing? He'd ask, completely passing by me on his way to Sarah's room. The pattern continued year after year. While Sarah went from specialist to specialist, I learned to take care of myself. I did my homework without help, packed my own bags for school trips, and figured out how to deal with teenage problems on my own. Mom never worked, she was too busy being Sarah's personal nurse and advocate. By my senior year of high school, I had perfect grades and a clear plan. I applied for scholarships behind my parents' backs. They were too busy taking Sarah to yet another specialist to help with college applications anyway. The day I got my full scholarship letter, I ran home excited to share the news. I found Mom in the kitchen, preparing Sarah's special allergen-free dinner. Mom, I got a full scholarship to State University. You and Dad won't have to pay anything. That's nice, dear. Could you set the table? Sarah needs to eat on schedule with her new medications. That moment crystallized everything for me. I realized I would never be the priority in this house, no matter what I achieved. But instead of letting it crush me, I let it fuel me. I didn't need their attention or approval. I had something better, I had my freedom. The day I left for college, Mom was too busy with Sarah's latest health crisis to even say goodbye properly. Dad just handed me some gas money and said, "Drive safe." College flew by like a dream. I threw myself into my studies, made real friends for the first time, and graduated with honors. The marketing department at Reynolds and Company snapped me up right after graduation, and suddenly I was earning more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I hadn't heard much from my parents during college, just the occasional text from Mom asking if I was doing okay before immediately launching into updates about Sarah's latest health issues. But that changed once I started working. The first call came about 6 months into my job. "Erica, honey," Mom's voice was sugary sweet, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me before. "Your father and I are in a bit of a tight spot. Sarah needs some new treatments, and with the medical bills." I cut her off. "How much do you need, Mom?" "Oh, just $2,000. We'll pay you back next month." They never did pay me back. Not for that loan, or the next one, or the one after that. But honestly, I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had something they needed, and that gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. Then I met Mike. He always making me laugh, always seeing the bright side. We dated for a year before he proposed, right there in that same break room with a ring hidden in a coffee cup. When we told my parents we were getting married, Mom's first response was, "Oh, but Sarah's having some health issues right now. We might not be able to contribute much." "We don't need anything," I told her firmly. "We're handling it ourselves." And we did. We had a small, perfect wedding with just our closest friends. Mike and I paid for everything ourselves, took a modest honeymoon to the beach, and came back ready to build our life together. We both worked hard and saved every penny we could. Within 2 years, we had enough for a down payment on a small apartment. 3 years later, it was paid off completely. "We should have a baby," Mike said one night, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset. I looked at him, this wonderful man who had given me everything I'd never had growing up, unconditional love, support, and a true partnership. "Yes," I said. "We should." Emily was born on a spring morning, perfect and healthy. Mike was the proudest dad I'd ever seen, taking pictures of every little thing she did. When she was 2 months old, he got a big promotion at work. "Just one business trip," he told me, kissing Emily's forehead. 3 days in Chicago, then I'm all yours again." I drove him to the train station that morning. That was the last time I saw him. The call I got wasn't from Mike, it was from the railway company. There had been an accident. The train had derailed. There were no survivors. The first few weeks after Mike's death passed in a blur. I moved through my days like a ghost, going through the motions of feeding Emily, changing her, trying to keep both of us alive while feeling half dead inside. The insurance company called with details about Mike's life insurance policy, but money wasn't what I needed most right then. I needed help. "Mom," I said over the phone, my voice cracking. "I can't do this alone. Could you help me with Emily? Just for a few months while I get back on my feet. I'll pay you, whatever you want." There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh, honey," Mom said, and for a moment I felt hope. Then, I'm not as young as I used to be. Taking care of a baby is so demanding, and with my blood pressure. I just can't risk my health, Erica. Maybe you could hire someone? You have the insurance money now, right?" The words hit me like a slap. I thought about all those years Mom had devoted to Sarah's care, how she'd never worked, because Sarah needed her constant attention. But now, when her other daughter needed her, when her granddaughter needed her. "Yeah," I said flatly. "I'll figure something out." And I did. I found a wonderful nanny named Maria who loved Emily like her own. The insurance money meant I could afford the best care for my daughter, and slowly, we settled into a new normal. Emily grew from a baby into a toddler, showing more of Mike's smile every day. Then came the call about Sarah's engagement. "Your sister is marrying James Peterson," Mom gushed over the phone. "His family owns that big real estate development company. Can you believe it?" "That's great," I said, watching Emily stack blocks on our living room floor. "I'm happy for her." But the next call wasn't so joyful. Dad sounded stressed. "Erica, we need to talk about Sarah's wedding. We're taking out a loan. Using the house as collateral." When he told me the amount, I felt sick. "Dad, no, that's your house. Your retirement security. You can't risk that for one day." "Now listen here," he said, his voice getting that stern tone I remembered from childhood. "We won't have the Petersons thinking we can't give Sarah a proper wedding. We've already signed the papers." I tried reasoning with them. I offered to help pay for a more modest celebration. But Mom just got offended. "You don't understand, Erica. This is Sarah's big day. She deserves her dream wedding. We can't have her future in-laws thinking we're common." I thought about my own wedding, small, modest, perfect. Mike and I had paid for everything ourselves, proud to start our life together without debt. But of course, Sarah needed something grander. Sarah always needed more. Sarah's wedding was exactly what you'd expect, extravagant, over the top, and, according to Mom, absolutely perfect. Then Sarah moved away with James to Boston, and suddenly my parents' perfect daughter wasn't so perfect anymore. "Can you believe she won't even take our calls?" Mom sobbed into the phone one evening. "We took out that loan for her wedding, and now she won't even help with the payments." I bit back an "I told you so" and instead said, "That must be hard, Mom." Gradually, my parents started calling more often, not just when they needed money. They wanted to see Emily, invited us for Sunday dinners, remembered my birthday for the first time in years. It felt nice. Like maybe we could be a real family. I started helping them out, paying bills here and there, buying groceries. For Dad and Mom's 35th wedding anniversary, I surprised them with a 2-week vacation to Florida and a new car for Dad. "You're such a good daughter, Erica," Mom said, actually hugging me. It was the first time I could remember her doing that in years. Then Dad got sick. Really sick. Something with his heart that kept him out of work for months. One evening, they asked me to come over after Emily's bedtime. "We're going to lose the house," Dad said, his voice weak. "The loan payments, without my salary." Mom was crying. "We don't know what to do, Erica. We're behind on payments already. Move in with us," Mom suggested suddenly. "We could help with Emily after school, and you could help with the loan payments. Please, sweetheart. We don't want to lose our home." I thought about my apartment, my independence, the life I'd built for myself and Emily. "I don't know, Mom. It's an hour commute to work from here." "Please," Dad said, and I saw real fear in his eyes. "We'll make it work." Emily would love having her grandparents around. They were right about that part. When I told Emily we might move in with Grandma and Grandpa, her whole face lit up. Within a month, we were moved in. I found good tenants for my apartment, a young couple with steady jobs who signed a year-long lease. Emily was overjoyed, running around the house exploring every corner like it was a magical castle. I took over the loan payments and most of the household expenses. Mom seemed to transform overnight into the grandmother she'd never been before, picking Emily up from school, helping her with homework, making her favorite snacks. "Look what Grandma made for you, Emily," she'd say, pulling fresh cookies from the oven. Emily would beam, and I'd try not to remember all the times I'd come home to an empty kitchen as a child. For a while, it seemed to work. Dad's health improved, though slowly. I adjusted to the long commute, telling myself it was worth it to see Emily so happy. Every month when I made the loan payment, I reminded myself that I was helping my parents keep their home. But there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a voice that whispered, "How long can this last? When will the other shoe drop?" After Dad recovered and returned to work, I noticed Mom started making excuses about watching Emily. My back hurts today, Erica. I'm not as young as I used to be. It's so exhausting keeping up with a child her age. Finally, one morning, she just came out with it, I think you should hire a nanny. I can't handle this anymore. So I hired Karen, a sweet older lady who clicked with Emily immediately. Every morning, I'd leave for my hour-long commute to work, wondering why I was still living in my parents' house when I had a perfectly good apartment across town. But every time I mentioned moving back, Mom would bake her famous apple pie, the one she knew Emily loved, and say things like, "Oh, but we love having you both here. Don't we live so well together?" Emily would beam, her face covered in apple filling, and I'd push down my frustration for another month. This went on for 2 years. Then one evening, Mom and Dad sat me down after Emily went to bed. "Honey," Mom started, her eyes already welling up. "We still have 2 years left on Sarah's wedding loan." Dad jumped in, "We know it's a lot to ask, but could you stay until it's paid off? We're so close to being free of it." I thought about the exhausting commute, the way my life had been put on hold. But then I thought about Emily's happy face when she talked about living with her grandparents. "Okay," I said. "1 more year." I called my tenants and extended their lease. Then came the day that changed everything. I walked up to the house after another long day at work, and there was Sarah, standing in the doorway with a very pregnant belly. "Move away from the door, Sarah," Mom screeched from inside. "You'll catch your death in that draft." Sarah smirked at me as she stepped aside. Well, look who's here." Inside, it was like stepping back in time. Mom was fluttering around Sarah like a worried hen, adjusting pillows, checking her temperature, asking if she needed anything. "I made your favorite dinner, Sarah. And there's herbal tea for the baby." During dinner, Sarah dropped her bombshell. "I've decided to have the baby here," she announced. "So you and Dad can help with the newborn." Mom's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Of course we will. We'll help with everything." I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, as the memory hit me like a physical blow. Me, alone with 3-month-old Emily, desperately calling Mom after Mike's death. "You know I can't risk my health taking care of a baby, Erica." I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw with perfect clarity what I'd been trying to ignore for years. Nothing had changed. Nothing would ever change. Sarah would always be the one who needed them, and I would always be the one who needed to understand. For the next 2 weeks, I watched history repeat itself in excruciating detail. Mom waited on Sarah hand and foot, bringing her breakfast in bed, scheduling doctor's appointments, and stocking the house with her favorite foods. The monthly apple pie that had been Mom's way of keeping Emily and me there? It stopped appearing altogether. The final straw came one evening when I overheard Mom and Sarah discussing nursery plans for my room and Emily's room. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into the living room where everyone was gathered. "So that's it? You're just going to pretend the last few years never happened? That Sarah didn't abandon you with a massive loan that I've been helping pay?" Sarah rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. Saint Erica to the rescue." "Sarah, honey, don't get upset. It's not good for the baby," Mom fussed. "No, let's talk about this," I pressed on. "Let's talk about how you mortgaged your house for her wedding, and then she disappeared. Let's talk about how I've been paying that loan while she was off living her best life." "That's none of your business," Sarah snapped. "Nobody asked you to pay anything. If you're so unhappy here, why don't you just go back to your precious apartment?" "Erica," Mom cut in, practically pushing me toward the door. "Why don't you run to the store? We need a few things." She thrust a shopping list into my hands. "It'll give everyone a chance to calm down." I felt like a child being sent to my room, but I went. Maybe the fresh air would help me think clearly. 20 minutes later, I returned with the groceries. The sight that greeted me stopped me cold. Emily was sitting on the front steps, crying, surrounded by hastily packed bags and boxes, all our belongings. "Mommy!" She ran to me, sobbing. Aunt Sarah yelled at me. She said we had to get out, and when I started crying, she scared me and pushed all our stuff out here. Something snapped inside me. I stormed into the house. "How dare you?" I shouted. "How dare you treat my daughter like this?" "Erica, calm down," Dad started. "No, I will not calm down. For years, I've watched you favor Sarah. When Mike died, and I needed help with Emily, you couldn't be bothered. But Sarah snaps her fingers and you jump. I paid your bills, your loan, helped save your house, and this is how you repay me? By throwing my child out?" "Now listen here," Mom began. "No, you listen. I've spent my entire life being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who's supposed to understand when Sarah needs something. I've given you everything, and you've given me nothing but scraps of attention when Sarah wasn't around to demand it all." I grabbed the grocery bags and hurled them across the room. Cans rolled across the floor, eggs cracked, and vegetables scattered everywhere. Mom gasped. Sarah smirked. Dad's face turned red with anger. "Get out," he roared. "Get out of our house, and don't you dare come back." "You're no daughter of ours," Mom added, her voice cold. "We never want to see you again." I stood there, breathing hard, looking at these people who were supposed to be my family. Then I turned and walked out, closing the door on 28 years of trying to be good enough. Standing on the sidewalk that night, surrounded by hastily packed bags and boxes, I felt completely lost. Emily's small hand gripped mine tightly as tears rolled down her cheeks. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, trying to think clearly. Our apartment was rented out for another year, and I couldn't just kick the tenants out. Legally, I needed to give them 3 months' notice. I called a nearby hotel first, then ordered an Uber XL to help with our bags. As Emily fell asleep in the hotel bed that night, I sat in the darkness with my laptop, searching for temporary apartments. The next morning, I found a furnished month-to-month rental about 15 minutes from my office. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. I called my tenants while Emily was eating breakfast. "Hi, Lisa," I said to my tenant. "I hate to do this, but I need to give you notice. Some family circumstances have changed." Lisa was understanding. "Of course. We'll start looking right away. Take care, Erica." The next 3 months were strange. Our temporary apartment felt like living in limbo, not quite homeless, but not quite home either. Emily was quieter than usual, processing everything in her own way. Finally, after what felt like forever, Lisa called to say they'd found a new place. 3 months to the day after being thrown out of my parents' house, Emily and I walked back into our apartment. The moment I turned the key in the lock, something shifted inside me. This was our home. Our safe place. No drama, no favoritism, no walking on eggshells. "We're home." Emily ran from room to room, rediscovering her old toys and books we'd left behind. That night, after Emily was asleep, I sat down and really looked at our finances. We were doing well, better than well, actually. Without supporting my parents, I had extra money each month. I opened a new savings account specifically for Emily's college fund and set up automatic monthly transfers. Over the next few weeks, we settled back into our old routine. Emily went back to her old school, where her friends welcomed her back with open arms. I threw myself into work, earning a promotion I'd been too distracted to pursue while living with my parents. 6 peaceful months passed. Emily and I had found our rhythm again: school, work, movie nights, weekend adventures. No drama, no guilt, no complicated family dynamics. Just us. Then came the knock at our door one Sunday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the peephole. My heart stopped. There stood my parents, and they were holding a baby. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Erica, please," Mom started crying immediately. "We need your help." Dad looked older than I remembered, more broken. "Sarah, she's gone." They told me the whole story as they stood in my doorway. I hadn't invited them in. Sarah's husband had discovered she was cheating. A DNA test proved the baby wasn't his. He divorced her and refused any responsibility for the child. And Sarah? She dropped the baby with our parents and disappeared. We don't know where she is, Mom sobbed. She won't answer our calls. We can't do this alone, Erica. We need you to move back in. Help with the loan payments, help with the baby. I'm too old to care for an infant, Mom added, making that familiar tired face I'd seen so many times before. Please, sweetheart. We'll lose the house. I looked at them, really looked at them. Mom's manipulative tears. Dad's desperate eyes. The innocent baby in their arms. And suddenly, I saw everything with perfect clarity. No, I said quietly. What? Mom's tears stopped abruptly. I said no, I won't help you. Not this time. How can you be so heartless? Mom's voice rose, echoing through the hallway. Your own family. We'll be out on the street. They'll take our house. All because you're too selfish to help. Several neighbors' doors opened, curious faces peeking out. You want to do this here, Mom? Fine. My voice was steady. Let's talk about how you refused to help me when Mike died and I had a 3-month-old. Let's talk about how you mortgaged your house for Sarah's wedding. Let's talk about how Sarah abandoned you with that loan, just like she's abandoned her baby now. This isn't about me being heartless, this is about you finally facing the consequences of your choices. How dare you, Dad started. No, how dare you? You created this situation with your constant favoritism. You taught Sarah she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. And now you want me to clean up your mess again? Not happening. We're your parents, Mom wailed. No, I said firmly. You're Sarah's parents. You made that very clear the night you threw my daughter out on the street. Now please leave, and don't come back. Forget my address, forget my phone number, forget I exist, just like you did for most of my life. I closed the door on their protests and leaned against it, breathing hard. Through the door, I could hear Mom's continued screaming, but it didn't touch me anymore. Mommy? Emily stood in the hallway, watching me. Are you okay? I walked over and hugged her tight. Yes, baby. I'm better than okay. I'm free. That was the last time I saw my parents. I don't know what happened to them or Sarah or the baby. Sometimes Emily asks about them, and I'm honest with her. I tell her that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who hurt you, even if they're family. These days, our life is good. Emily is thriving in school, I love my job, and we're building the kind of life I always dreamed of, one based on real love, not obligation or manipulation. Sometimes, late at night, I look at old family photos and feel a twinge of sadness for what could have been. But then I look at Emily, growing up strong and secure in the knowledge that she is loved unconditionally, and I know I made the right choice. I'm Ella Mitchell, and our family seemed perfect on paper. Mom worked at the tax service, wearing her position like a badge of honor. She'd come home each evening, briefcase stuffed with papers, talking about promotions and pension plans. Dad worked at the city administration, but his heart wasn't in it. I'd catch him sketching business plans on napkins during dinner. Think about it, Sarah, he'd say, eyes bright with excitement. A whole chain of specialty stores. We could. Stop it, James, Mom would cut him off sharply. We have stable jobs, good benefits. Why can't you be satisfied with that? I didn't understand their arguments then. To me, Dad's dreams sounded like fairy tales, full of possibility and adventure. But Mom would always shake her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then came that night. I was playing with my dolls when Mom's scream echoed through our house. What do you mean you took out a loan? Her voice was shrill, terrifying. How much? Sarah, please, I've done all the research. Are you insane? Do you want us to end up on the street? I crept to my bedroom door, peering through the crack. Mom was pacing, her face red with anger. I won't let you drag me down with you, James, I won't. The next morning, Dad was gone. Mom told me he'd moved to another city to start his business. I didn't understand why he hadn't said goodbye. Weeks turned into months. Dad's business succeeded, I knew, because Mom would stare at the alimony checks with a mixture of anger and disgust. But he never came back, never called, never tried to be part of my life. Mom threw herself into her work even more after that. She hired Elena, my nanny, who became my primary caregiver while Mom spent longer and longer hours at the office. "Your mother's working hard for you," Elena would say when I asked why Mom was never home. But I knew the truth, Mom was hiding from the living reminder of Dad's success, me. She'd rather bury herself in spreadsheets and tax forms than face the daughter of the man who proved her wrong. Some nights, I'd hear her on the phone with her friends. "He actually made it work. Can you believe it? But at what cost?" He abandoned his own daughter. But Dad hadn't just abandoned me, Mom had pushed him away, choosing the security of her job over the uncertainty of his dreams. And now, I was paying the price for their choices, caught in the middle of their broken marriage, watching my mother retreat further into her work while my father built his empire in another city. My grandmother Marion was like a burst of color in our grayscale life. She didn't visit often, but when she did, our house came alive with her energy and warmth. Though these visits usually ended in heated arguments with Mom. "Sarah, look what you've done," Grandma would say, gesturing around our empty feeling house. "James is thriving in his business, and you've torn this family apart for what? Your pride? Don't you dare lecture me about my choices, Mom." Mom would snap back, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Stay out of my life and my decisions." I'd hide in my room during these fights, but I could still hear every word. Sometimes Grandma would come up afterward, her eyes sad, but her smile warm. When I turned 7, Grandma started paying for me to attend Riverside Academy, a private school she said would give me better opportunities. Mom didn't object. I think she was just glad to have me out of the house for longer hours. As I grew older, I began to understand why Mom kept me at arm's length. Every time I got excited about a school project or showed initiative in something, I'd catch her watching me with this cold, distant look. I reminded her too much of Dad, the man who'd proved her wrong, who'd succeeded despite her predictions of failure. Mom provided for me materially. I always had clean clothes, good food, and a roof over my head. But there were never any hugs, no kisses goodnight, no I love yous. She spent her free time with friends from work, going on weekend trips and vacations without me. I stayed with Elena, my nanny, or occasionally with Grandma. I thought this was normal. I thought all mothers maintained this professional distance from their children. Until the day I went to my friend Katie's birthday party. The party was in full swing when Katie knocked over her juice. Instead of anger, her mother rushed over with a warm laugh. "Oh, sweetie, are you okay?" She hugged Katie close, kissing her forehead, helping her clean up while they giggled together. I stood frozen, watching this display of casual affection like an anthropologist observing a newly discovered tribe. Katie's mom hugged her just because. She kissed her cheek for no reason. She said, "I love you," without any special occasion prompting it. That night, I lay in bed imagining what it would be like to have a mom who hugged me, who kissed me goodnight, who wanted to spend time with me. I was hopeful when Mom started dating Robert. He'd come over for dinner, always bringing me small gifts, candy, or little toys. He seemed genuinely interested in my school stories, asking questions, and laughing at my jokes. When Mom announced they were getting married, I dared to dream that finally, I might get the family I'd seen at Katie's house. But nothing changed. Mom remained distant with me, even after the wedding. Then came the announcement of her pregnancy. "You're going to have a little sister," Robert told me, grinning widely. "Isn't that exciting?" I was 8 when Sophie was born. From the very first day, I watched in stunned silence as Mom transformed, but only for my sister. She'd coo at Sophie, shower her with kisses, hold her close just because she could. All the things I'd been starving for my entire life, Sophie received in abundance. "Look at her tiny fingers," Mom would whisper, nuzzling Sophie's neck. Aren't they perfect? I'd stand in the doorway of the nursery, watching Mom rock Sophie to sleep, singing lullabies I'd never heard. Sometimes, the pain in my chest was so sharp I couldn't breathe. Why could she love Sophie but not me? Was it because Sophie wasn't Dad's daughter? Because she didn't remind Mom of her mistake? The final blow came when Mom quit her job to stay home with Sophie. The same woman who'd barely spared me an hour of her time was now dedicating her entire day to my half-sister. But even with all this newfound time at home, she still had none to spare for me. "Ella, your grandmother's coming to pick you up," she'd say, not even looking up from Sophie. "I need to focus on the baby." I spent more and more time at Grandma's house. Sometimes I'd cry into my pillow there, wondering what was wrong with me, why I wasn't lovable enough. Why doesn't Mom love me like she loves Sophie? I finally asked Grandma one day. Grandma pulled me close, her voice thick with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart, sometimes adults carry wounds that have nothing to do with the people they hurt. Your mother's pain about your father, she's taking it out on you, and it's not fair." The years that followed Sophie's birth were like living in a minefield. I never knew when the next explosion would come. By the time Sophie was old enough to understand the family dynamics, she'd learned to use them to her advantage with frightening precision. I was 14 when the incidents started becoming more frequent. One morning, I found my science project torn apart on my desk. But just as I wanted to scold this little rascal, she had already disappeared from the room. "Mom!" Sophie came running downstairs, tears streaming down her face. "Ella destroyed my new dollhouse because she was jealous that Daddy bought it for me." "That's not true, I was studying all evening." "Sophie, tell the truth." Mom's face hardened as she looked at me. "Why do you always blame your sister? Go to your room, you're grounded for 2 weeks." This became our routine. Sophie would break something, hide Mom's jewelry in my backpack, or plant Robert's missing money in my room. Each time, I'd try to defend myself, but my words fell on deaf ears. "I saw her take your bracelet, Mom," Sophie would say, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I didn't want to tell, but she's been stealing things." Robert would look at me with disgust. I knew we couldn't trust her. Like father, like daughter, both of them dishonest to the core. At first, I fought back. I'd cry, scream, beg them to believe me. But gradually, I learned that defending myself only made things worse. Sophie reveled in my punishments, watching with a small smirk as I was sent to my room, grounded, or had my allowance taken away. One night, I heard Mom and Robert talking in their bedroom. I'd stopped to pick up some laundry in the hallway when their voices drifted through the door. "Why don't we just send her to live with your mother?" Robert was saying. "She's nothing but trouble." "Are you kidding?" Mom scoffed. "James sends $3,000 in alimony every month. That's why I can afford to stay home with Sophie. Once Ella turns 18, that money stops. We need to keep her here until then." The laundry basket slipped from my hands, clothes scattering across the floor. That's when everything clicked into place. I wasn't a daughter to her, I was a meal ticket. The only reason she kept me around was my father's money. That night, I lay in bed and made a plan. I would focus on my studies, get into a good college, and escape this house forever. I started staying late at the library, taking extra classes, anything to minimize my time at home. "Look at her, acting so superior with her studying," Sophie would taunt. "You think you're better than us?" But I didn't care anymore. Each insult, each false accusation, each punishment, they were just counting down the days until my freedom. I started keeping a calendar, marking off days until graduation, like a prisoner marking time until release. When Sophie stole Mom's expensive perfume and planted the empty bottle in my room, I accepted the punishment silently. When she took money from Robert's wallet and stuffed it in my coat pocket, I didn't even try to defend myself. Their words couldn't hurt me anymore. I was already gone in my mind, counting down the days until I could make it real. It was a Tuesday in late March, during my senior year, when everything finally came crashing down. The moment I opened our front door, the acrid smell of smoke hit my nostrils. My heart stopped. Living in this house had taught me that disaster could strike at any moment. Following the smell, I rushed down to the basement. The scene that greeted me made my blood run cold. Sophie was crouched in the corner, surrounded by burning newspapers and cardboard boxes. She had created a small bonfire, and the flames were already licking dangerously close to the wooden storage shelves. "Sophie, are you insane?" I screamed, lunging forward. "You'll burn the house down." Without thinking, I grabbed her shoulders and yanked her away from the fire. It all happened so fast. She lost her balance, stumbled backward, and threw out her arm to break her fall. The sickening crack that followed will haunt me forever. "Aita!" Sophie's scream pierced the air as she clutched her arm. "You hurt me. You did it on purpose." My hands shaking, I pulled out my phone and called Mom while simultaneously trying to stamp out the remaining flames. "Mom, there's been an accident. Sophie's hurt. Please come home now." Everything after that happened in a blur. Mom burst through the door, took one look at Sophie cradling her arm, and rushed her to the hospital without even glancing at me. I sat on the stairs, my clothes still smelling of smoke, waiting for the axe to fall. When they returned hours later, Sophie's arm was in a cast, and Mom's face was set in stone. Without saying a word, she walked straight to my room and started pulling out my clothes, throwing them into garbage bags. "Mom, please let me explain," I begged. "Sophie was playing with fire in the basement. I was trying to save her. I can show you the..." She told me everything. Mom cut me off, her voice trembling with rage. "How you pushed her down the stairs, because you were jealous of her new school bag. How you've been threatening her for weeks." "What? That's insane. There was a fire." Sophie stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Stop lying. You hurt me on purpose. You've always hated me." "Get out," Mom said, dragging the bags toward the front door. "Get out of my house before I call the police and have you arrested for assault. Who do you think they'll believe?" I felt the blood drain from my face. She was right. With my record of past incidents, all carefully orchestrated by Sophie, who would believe me? "I need money too." Mom laughed angrily. "Money? Your father's alimony will be paying for Sophie's medical bills. And don't even think about running to him with some made-up story. One word from you, and I'll file a police report about this assault. How would that look on your college applications?" The threat hung in the air like poison. With trembling hands, I grabbed my coat and one of the garbage bags containing my belongings. The rest of my things lay scattered across our front lawn like debris after a storm. I made my way to Grandma's house in a daze, dragging the bag behind me. When she opened the door, one look at my face told her everything she needed to know. The next few months passed in a blur of studying and college applications. When graduation day arrived, I sat among my classmates, scanning the crowd. Despite everything, a small part of me hoped to see Mom's face in the audience. But only Grandma was there, beaming with pride as I received my diploma with honors. Thanks to my grades and determination, I earned a full scholarship to State University's business school. Those 4 years were a breath of fresh air, no walking on eggshells, no false accusations, just the freedom to be myself and excel. After graduating with a degree in business management, I landed a job at a marketing firm. 8 years flew by, each one taking me further from the trauma of my childhood home. I had my own apartment, a successful career, and most importantly, peace. My only family connection was Grandma, who remained my rock through everything. Then I met David. He quite literally ran into me at a coffee shop, spilling his latte all over both of us. Instead of getting angry, we couldn't stop laughing about it. "Let me buy you a replacement coffee," he said, "and maybe a new blouse?" One coffee led to dinner led to more dates, and within 6 months, we were planning a wedding. It was a small ceremony, just us, a judge, and Grandma, who cried happy tears throughout. "You deserve this happiness, sweetheart," she whispered during our mother-daughter dance, which she had insisted on doing. David owned a chain of successful fast food restaurants across the city. One evening over dinner, He mentioned having trouble with his supply chain management. "You're great at analysis," he said. "Would you consider coming to work with me? I could use someone I trust to oversee our purchasing." I jumped at the chance. Finally, all my business training could be put to good use in a family business, a healthy one, built on trust and mutual respect. Within months of diving into the paperwork, patterns started emerging. Several suppliers were consistently overcharging while delivering subpar products. But one vendor, Fresh Fields Produce, was particularly egregious. "David, look at these numbers," I said one evening, spreading reports across our dining table. "Fresh Fields has been charging us 40% above market rate for produce that's barely making grade. And look at these delivery records, they're consistently late, affecting our inventory management." David studied the reports carefully. "This is excellent work, honey. No wonder our profit margins have been tight. I'm terminating their contract immediately." "I've already researched some alternatives," I said, pulling out more documents. "These 3 companies have better prices and quality ratings." As I watched David make calls to begin the process of changing suppliers, I felt a surge of pride. This was what a real partnership looked like, working together, trusting each other, building something meaningful. My phone buzzed with an unknown number while I was reviewing supplier contracts. Something made me hesitate before answering. "Hello? Ella? It's Sophie." My hand tightened around the phone. 10 years of silence, and now this? "What do you want?" I kept my voice neutral, professional. "Can't sisters catch up? Let's meet for coffee. We have so much to talk about." "No," the word came out sharp and final. "Say what you need to say." There was a pause, then Sophie's voice changed, dropping its fake sweetness. "Fine. Your husband is about to make a huge mistake." "Fresh Fields Produce?" "That's my fiancé's company." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "Marcus and I are getting married in 3 months," Sophie continued. "We've been planning this amazing wedding, cathedral venue, designer dress, 5-star catering. But we need the income from your husband's restaurant chain to pay for it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you telling me you've been deliberately overcharging our restaurants to fund your wedding?" "Don't act so self-righteous," Sophie sneered. "Marcus just adjusted the prices a little." "We need this, Ella. You have to convince David to keep our contract." "Adjusted the prices?" I felt my voice rising. "You're charging 40% above market rate for substandard produce. Some of it is nearly expired when it arrives. You're scamming us." "It's called business, sis. Besides, you owe me. After everything you did." "Everything I did?" I cut her off. "You mean like when you lit a fire in the basement and then got me thrown out of my home? Or all those years you planted stolen items in my room?" "Just talk to David," Sophie demanded. "Tell him to keep our contract, or..." "Or what? You'll lie about me again?" "I'm not that scared little girl anymore, Sophie. I won't help you defraud my husband's business to fund your dream wedding. Find another way to pay for your cathedral. You'll regret this," she spat and hung up. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. "Mom. How dare you?" she started without preamble. "After everything this family has done for you." I actually laughed. "Family? What family? The one that framed me for theft? The one that threw me out on the street with garbage bags of clothes? You ungrateful little, your sister is finally happy, finally getting married, and you're trying to ruin it. Where's your loyalty?" "Loyalty?" My voice was steady now, calm. "Let's talk about loyalty, Mom. Where was your loyalty when I needed a mother? When Sophie was framing me for theft? When I was sleeping on Grandma's couch because you chose to believe another of Sophie's lies? You broke her arm," Mom shouted. "I saved her life. She was playing with fire in the basement, or did you forget that convenient detail? But you never wanted the truth, did you? You just wanted excuses to hate me because I reminded you of Dad. Don't you dare." No, you don't dare, I cut her off. You don't get to demand anything from me. The only family I have is Grandma, who actually loves me. Sophie and her fiancé can find honest ways to pay for their wedding. I won't help them steal from my husband's business. With that, I hung up. That evening, I sat with David in our living room, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I told him everything, about Sophie, her fiancé Marcus, their scheme to fund their lavish wedding through overcharging our restaurants. David listened quietly, his face growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he reached over and took my hands in his. Honey, I'm not just canceling their contract now, I'm making sure every restaurant owner in this city knows exactly what kind of business Fresh Fields Produce runs. Are you sure? I asked. They'll probably try to cause trouble. Let them try, David said firmly. What they're doing isn't just unethical, it's fraud. And I protect what's mine, both my business and my wife. Over the next week, David shared the documentation I'd gathered with other restaurant owners in his network. The response was immediate and overwhelming. One by one, restaurants began canceling their contracts with Fresh Fields Produce. Marcus's reputation in the industry was destroyed. Then came another call from Mom. You've gone too far, she hissed. You're destroying your sister's future out of spite. No, Mom. Their own dishonesty did that. Well, let's see how you like being cut off completely, she threatened. I'm talking to your grandmother tonight. You won't see a penny of inheritance after what you've done. I actually smiled. Go ahead, call Grandma. I already told her everything last week. There was a pause on the other end. That's right, I continued. I told her about Sophie's fiancé's scam, about their attempted blackmail, about your threats. And you know what? She's already updated her will. I'm her sole heir, not that I care about the money. Unlike some people, I can build my own future without scamming others. Mom's response was a string of curses before she hung up. Weeks passed. Through the grapevine, I heard that Sophie's dream wedding had been cancelled. No cathedral, no designer dress, no five-star catering. She and Marcus had a quick ceremony at City Hall instead. Apparently, she blamed me for ruining her special day and destroying her fiancé's business. But I felt nothing but peace. For the first time in my life, I'd stood my ground against their manipulation and won. Their threats had no power over me anymore. Last week, Grandma came over for dinner. As we sat in our garden watching the sunset, she squeezed my hand. You know, Ella, she said, sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. You've built something beautiful here, a loving marriage, an honest business, a life of integrity. I'm so proud of you. I looked around at my home, my life, everything I'd built despite, or maybe because of, all the challenges they'd thrown at me. Sophie and Mom might blame me for their failures, but I know the truth. Their downfall came from their own choices, their own dishonesty, their own cruelty. As for me, I finally have what I always wanted, a real family, built on love, trust, and truth. And nothing they can do will ever take that away from me. I don't remember my mother's face. She died when I was 2, leaving just scattered photographs and Dad's stories to piece together who she was. My name is Kimberly, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the truth is the only weapon you need against lies. Growing up in a politician's house meant getting used to empty spaces. Our mansion had 6 bedrooms, but most days it felt like I rattled around in there alone, like a marble in an empty box. Dad threw himself into his work after Mom died. For 2 years straight, he was just gone. Not physically, he still lived with us, but emotionally, he might as well have been on another planet. Your father's giving a speech tonight, Kimberly, my nanny, Sarah, would say, turning on the TV. See, there he is. I'd press my little hands against the screen, trying to touch his face. That's how I usually saw him back then, through a glass barrier, talking to crowds of strangers instead of me. Thank God for Grandma Rose. She'd come over almost every day, bringing her famous chocolate chip cookies and stories about Dad when he was my age. I was 6 when everything changed. Dad came home one evening, looking more alive than I'd seen him in years. "Kimberly, honey, I want you to meet someone special," he said. That's how Patricia entered our lives. My new stepmother was tall, perfectly put together, with this practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. I remember standing there in my Pokemon pajamas, looking up at her, and feeling something off. The first few months weren't too bad. Patricia mostly ignored me, which was fine by me. I had my own wing of the house anyway, my bedroom, bathroom, and a little study area where I did my homework. Sarah stayed on as my nanny, and between her and Grandma Rose, I barely had to interact with Patricia at all. But I started noticing things. Like how Patricia's smile would drop the second Dad left the room. Or how she'd accidentally schedule her fancy lunch parties during my piano recitals, so Dad had to choose between them. He always chose her events, couldn't disappoint the wife of a rising political star, after all. "Don't take it personally, sweetie," Grandma Rose would tell me. "Your father's just busy. The campaign trail is demanding." I tried not to. Really, I did. But it's hard not to take it personally when you're watching your father's career updates on YouTube instead of having dinner with him. When your stepmother's shopping sprees get more attention than your straight A's. High school changed everything. Dad started talking about my future more, probably because his advisors told him education was a hot topic for voters. Whatever the reason, I wasn't complaining. For the first time in years, he seemed actually interested in my life. "Yale, Harvard, Stanford, take your pick, Kimmy," he said one evening, surprising me by actually being home for dinner. "With your grades, you could get into any of them. I'll cover everything, tuition, housing, whatever you need." I nearly choked on my pasta. Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. Then came my 16th birthday. I walked outside that morning to find a brand new Mercedes in the driveway, complete with a massive red bow. Dad was standing there, grinning like a kid himself. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." He dangled the keys in front of me. "Think you can handle it?" I screamed and hugged him so hard I probably wrinkled his $1,000 suit. For a moment, I felt like I had my old dad back, the one from before Mom died, before politics ate his life. Patricia's voice cut through my joy like ice. "A Mercedes? Really, Richard? For a 16-year-old? I could practically feel her glaring at my back as Dad showed me the car's features. Later that night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. "You're turning her into exactly what the opposition accuses us of representing, privileged, entitled rich kids." Patricia's voice carried through the walls. "What's next? A private jet for graduation? She's my daughter, Patricia. I've missed too many birthdays already. And how will it look when she wraps that car around a tree? Or when her spoiled little friends get her into drugs? Have you thought about your campaign?" After that, Patricia made it her mission to save me from myself, as she put it. Every time Dad mentioned college plans, she'd bring up some article about trust fund kids going wild at university. When I needed money for school supplies, she'd question every penny. "Kimberly, dear," she'd say in that sugary voice she used when her country club friends were over, "do tell everyone about that C you got in chemistry. Such a shame, especially with all the resources your father provides." Meanwhile, her own credit card bills were astronomical. "I'm so lonely when Richard's away," she'd pout to Dad. "Shopping is my only comfort. Another $5,000 handbag. Another spa weekend. Another renovation project." I tried staying out of it. Really, I did. But Patricia wouldn't let me. "Your father works so hard," she'd say loudly when her friends visited, "and some people just take without any gratitude." She'd look right at me while saying it. One day, I finally snapped. It was during one of her lunch parties. She'd been making little digs at me all afternoon, and I just couldn't take it anymore. "At least I'm not the one bleeding him dry with shopping sprees," I shot back. The room went silent. Patricia's face turned red. That evening, Dad called me into his study. Patricia tells me you embarrassed her in front of her friends today. Kimberly, you need to try harder. She's doing her best to be a mother to you. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and went to my room. After that, I became a ghost in my own house. I took my meals in my room, timing my kitchen raids for when Patricia was out. I studied harder than ever, determined to get into a college far away from her. The only time I had to see her was when Dad was home, and then I'd play my part in our little family theater production. Winter break couldn't come fast enough that year. My friends had planned a snowboarding trip to Mountain Ridge Resort, and surprisingly, Patricia agreed when I asked permission. Dad was away on some campaign tour, as usual. Here's money for the trip, Patricia said, holding out several $100 bills. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. But remember, Kimberly, no showing off. We don't need stories about the politician's spoiled daughter making a scene at a ski resort. The morning we left, the sky was perfect, crystal clear blue, with fresh powder on the slopes. I'd been snowboarding at Mountain Ridge since I was 13, and the familiar rush of excitement filled me as we pulled into the parking lot. The first few runs were perfect. The wind in my face, the spray of snow, the absolute freedom, this was my happy place. No Patricia, no political drama, just me and the mountain. Then it happened. I still replay that moment in my head sometimes. I was on my favorite trail, coming down at a good clip. I'd done this run dozens of times before. But somehow, maybe I caught an edge, maybe I was going too fast, everything went wrong in an instant. The world spun. Sky, snow, sky, snow. I felt myself rolling, tumbling, my body hitting the slope again and again. There was pain, sharp and overwhelming, and then everything went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing and people shouting in the distance. Don't move. Someone was kneeling beside me. The ski patrol is coming. The pain in my legs was excruciating. Through the haze, I heard words like multiple fractures and emergency transport. In the ambulance, once they'd given me something for the pain, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. Dad would know what to do. Dad would help. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. With growing desperation, I called Patricia. What? Her sharp voice answered. Patricia, there's been an accident. I'm in an ambulance. Of course there has. Her voice turned venomous. You worthless little drunk. I knew you'd pull something like this. Stealing money wasn't enough, now you have to embarrass your father with a drunken accident? What? I wasn't drinking. I just fell. Save your lies for someone else, you little thief. Don't bother calling again. The line went dead. I stared at my phone in shock, tears streaming down my face. Thief? Drunk? What was she talking about? Miss, we're almost at the hospital, the paramedic said gently. Is there someone else we can call for you? I nodded numbly, giving them Grandma Rose's number. My legs throbbed with every bump in the road, but somehow the pain in my chest hurt worse. Hours passed in a blur of x-rays, doctors, and morphine. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Dad to call back. He had to have gotten my messages by now. He had to know I was hurt. But no call came. The nurses were kind, bringing me extra blankets and Jell-O cups. But as night fell and I lay there alone in the sterile hospital room, listening to the beeping of machines, I felt more abandoned than I ever had in my life. I woke up to sunshine streaming through the hospital window and the familiar scent of Grandma Rose's perfume. For a moment, just a moment, everything felt okay. Then I saw her face. Grandma Rose looked older than I'd ever seen her, her usual warm smile replaced by something pained and worried. She was wringing her hands, something she only did when things were really bad. Grandma, what's wrong? Is Dad coming? She sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed. Oh, Kimberly, your father called me last night. He's very angry, sweetheart. He says you put his whole campaign at risk. What? How? He says. She paused, looking like each word hurt her. He says you stole money from the house. That you were drinking with your friends on the mountain, got into some kind of fight, and then fell while intoxicated. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's not true. None of that is true. I was just snowboarding, you know I've done it 100 times before. I know, honey, I know, she reached for my hand. But your father, he wants you to come stay with me after you're released. He says he's too disappointed to see you right now. The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening. My own father thought I was a drunk thief? He wouldn't even come see me in the hospital? But Grandma, you know me. You know I wouldn't. Of course I know, sweetheart. She squeezed my hand. We'll figure this out. We always do. I spent the next few hours trying to process everything. My legs ached, but the pain in my heart was worse. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's face from my 16th birthday, proud and smiling. How had everything gone so wrong? Then the door opened, and Patricia walked in. A nurse was checking my drip, and Patricia put on quite a show. Oh, you poor dear, she cooed, patting my hand. This must be so difficult for you. The nurse smiled approvingly at my stepmother's apparent concern. She's lucky to have such a caring family, she said, making some notes on my chart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the nurse that this woman was the reason my own father wouldn't come see me. But I just lay there, watching Patricia play her part. As soon as the nurse's footsteps faded down the hall, something in my gut told me to reach for my phone. I'd learned long ago to trust those instincts when it came to Patricia. Quietly, I started the voice recorder. Just in time. Patricia's face transformed into something ugly and triumphant. She perched on the edge of my bed, enjoying my discomfort as I tried to shift away. Oh, Kimberly, she practically purred. You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment. What are you talking about? She laughed, not her usual polite titter, but a harsh, cruel sound. You really are slow, aren't you? Let me spell it out for you. Daddy dearest thinks his precious little girl is a drunk and a thief. My throat went dry. You told him that? Of course I did. And the best part? She leaned in closer, her expensive perfume making me nauseous. He believed every word. That you stole thousands from his safe, money that's actually sitting quite nicely in my private account, by the way. That you were drinking and fighting on that mountain before your little accident. He'll never believe. He already has. She was practically gloating now. Your father won't be paying for any fancy colleges now. No more trust fund, no more inheritance. I've made sure of that. Soon, I'll be his sole heir, exactly as it should be. I felt the walls closing in. Why? Why are you doing this? Because you're in my way. Always have been. His precious little reminder of his first wife. She stood up, smoothing her designer skirt. But now you're just the family disappointment. The drunk, crippled daughter he'd rather forget. Tears were streaming down my face now. I'll get better, the doctor said. Please, she waved her hand dismissively. You'll be lucky if you ever walk normally again. Not that it matters, you won't need that fancy car of yours anymore. I'll be taking that off your hands. After all, what use does a disabled person have for a Mercedes? She walked to the door, then turned back with a smile that chilled me to my bones. Face it, Kimberly. You're all alone now. No money, no father, no future. Just you and your dear old grandmother, struggling to get by. Exactly where you belong. The door clicked shut behind her, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone and stopped the recording. I played back the recording, her venomous words, now preserved forever in digital form. My fingers hovered over the phone screen as I contemplated what to do with this evidence. After I was discharged from the hospital, I did not return to my parents' place. Grandma Rose's house wasn't huge like my father's mansion, but it had something our old house never had: warmth. Real warmth, the kind that comes from love, not central heating. Recovery was hell. Physical therapy 3 times a week, endless exercises, learning to walk again step by excruciating step. Grandma Rose was there through all of it, holding my hand when the pain got too bad, celebrating every tiny victory. Between therapy sessions, I threw myself into my studies. My laptop became my classroom: video lectures, online assignments, virtual study groups. Some days I could barely get out of bed, but I still logged on, determined not to let Patricia's predictions about my future come true. Then came graduation time. I'd managed to keep my grades up despite everything, and the acceptance letters started arriving. Yale, Columbia, Berkeley. Each one a dream school, each one completely out of reach. With shaking hands, I dialed Dad's number. It had been a year since the accident, since he'd abandoned me. Maybe now. Dad? My voice sounded small, even to myself. Kimberly. Cold. Formal. A politician's voice. I told you not to call. Please, just listen. I got into Yale. I'm not paying for college for a thief and a drunk. Don't call this number again. Click. I sat there, phone in hand, the recording from the hospital burning a hole in my pocket. I could have played it for him. Could have exposed Patricia's lies right then and there. But something stopped me. Pride, maybe. Or maybe it was the realization that a father who could believe those lies so easily, who could abandon his injured daughter without even hearing her side, maybe he didn't deserve the truth. I'll find another way, I told Grandma that night. And I did. I got a job as a barista, then picked up evening shifts at a bookstore. I learned to tune out the news when Dad's face appeared on TV, campaigning for his next big position. I stopped flinching when customers mentioned his name, stopped caring when they talked about what a family man he was. 3 years passed like that. Wake up, go to work, study in between shifts, save every penny. Grandma Rose helped as much as she could, even trying to sell her antique jewelry at one point. I wouldn't let her. You should be proud of yourself, she told me one evening as I counted my savings. I was about halfway to my goal. I realized. And I was. The girl who'd lived in that mansion, who'd driven that Mercedes, who'd waited desperately for her father's attention, she was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who didn't need his approval or his money. I was wiping down tables at the coffee shop when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Usually, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello? Kimberly, darling. That honey sweet voice. Patricia. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you want? Now, is that any way to talk to your loving stepmother? She laughed that fake laugh I remembered so well. Especially when I'm calling with such an opportunity for you. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. I'm not interested in anything you have to offer. Oh, but you will be. Your father's campaign is ramping up again. His image team has this brilliant idea, focusing on family values. They want to do a series of interviews with you. I almost laughed. You can't be serious. Very serious. You'll talk about what a wonderful father Richard is, how supportive he's been. How close we all are as a family. The loving daughter, reunited with her devoted father and stepmother. The public will eat it up. The sheer audacity of it struck me speechless for a moment. 3 years of silence, of struggling, of rebuilding my life from scratch, and now they wanted me to play happy families? You're insane, I finally managed. Why would I ever help you? Her voice turned sharp. Because if you don't, you can forget about any inheritance. And don't forget, your father can still press charges for that money you stole. I never stole anything. You took that money. Your word against mine, dear. Who do you think people will believe? The respected politician's wife or the troubled, alcoholic daughter? Something snapped inside me. All these years of swallowing her lies, of taking the high road, for what? Go to hell, Patricia. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I sat at my tiny desk in Grandma's house. My laptop hummed to life. The audio files were right where I'd kept them all this time, Patricia's hospital room confession, and now this latest call too. 3 years ago, I'd chosen silence. Chose to walk away and rebuild on my own terms. But enough was enough. I opened my social media accounts. Started typing. For 3 years, I've stayed quiet about what really happened. I attached the audio files. Added screenshots of Patricia's threatening messages. Everything. My finger hovered over the post button. This would change everything, not just for Patricia and Dad, but for me too. No going back after this. I pressed post. I had no idea what I'd started. Within hours, my post went viral. By morning, it was everywhere: news sites, political blogs, social media. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from reporters and TV producers. "We'd love to have you tell your story on our morning show," they'd say. Or, "This could really damage your father's campaign. Care to comment?" I turned them all down. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Watching his polling numbers plummet didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd expected. If anything, it made me feel hollow. Then, exactly 1 week after the post, my phone rang. Dad's number. "Can we meet?" he asked. His voice sounded different, tired, human. "Please?" We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop, not the one where I worked, but a quiet place across town. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the polished politician in his perfect suit. Instead, I saw a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, his tie loose, his shoulders slumped. "Kimberly," he said, standing up. "I don't even know where to start." "The beginning might be good," I said, sitting down. He took a deep breath. I heard the recordings. All of them. I'd been listening to them over and over, trying to understand how I could have been so blind. His voice cracked. "I failed you. Not just after the accident, but for years before that. I was so focused on my career, on building this perfect political image, that I forgot what really mattered." Tears were streaming down his face now. I'd never seen my father cry before. "Patricia confessed everything," he continued. "The stolen money, the lies about you drinking, how she manipulated the whole situation after your accident. She admitted she'd been trying to drive us apart for years." He reached across the table, taking my hands in his. "Can you ever forgive me?" I started crying too. "I missed you, Dad, so much." We stood up and hugged, right there in the middle of the coffee shop. 3 years of pain and separation dissolved in that embrace. "I filed for divorce," he told me later. "The lawyers are handling it. And I want to pay for your college, any school you want. It's the least I can do." "Yale's still my dream school," I admitted. "Then Yale it is." That evening, I made another post. This time, I told the whole story, not just Patricia's manipulation, but also how my father had owned his mistakes and chosen to make things right. To my surprise, people loved it. The story of a politician choosing his daughter over his image, admitting his failures, and working to make amends resonated with voters in a way no carefully crafted campaign message ever could. 2 months later, I moved into my dorm at Yale. Dad helped me carry my boxes up, just like any other father would. Grandma Rose cried happy tears as she made my bed with fresh sheets. Patricia? Last I heard, she was living off her divorce settlement somewhere in Florida. Sometimes I think about sending her a thank you note. After all, her final power play was what ultimately brought my father and me back together. But mostly, I think about how healing isn't always quiet or private. Sometimes it takes a public explosion to clear the way for something better to grow. Sometimes you have to break everything down to build it back up right. As for me, I'm majoring in political science. Ironic, I know. But I figure someone needs to show the world that politics and truth aren't always enemies. And Dad? He won his next election. Turns out, people prefer real humanity over perfect facades anyway. They say the truth will set you free. What they don't tell you is that sometimes, the truth does more than that. Sometimes, it brings you home.